You've probably heard this before. Civilization began in Sumer, somewhere around 4000 BC. People who'd once wandered the deserts and forests began building cities between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Uruk-Eridu names that echo through your 8th grade history class like dusty museum exhibits. They had ununiformed tablets, ziggurats, priest-kings, and even proto-bureaucracy. They were the first civilized people. Or so the story goes. But isn't it strange how suddenly everything appears in that tale? Agriculture, writing, mathematics, religion, laws, all fully formed, like Athena springing from the head of Zeus. You'd think there would be a longer prelude, a softer slope, some baby steps. This is the first quiet suspicion that nor at the base of the Sumerian pedestal. If civilization is so complicated, how did it appear so completely, so quickly? What happened just before that? Why do we rarely ask? You might assume that archaeologists have simply traced the roots back as far as they go, that the story starts there because that's where the evidence ends. But the truth is both simpler and stranger. The idea of Sumer as the beginning wasn't written in stone tablets thousands of years ago. It was decided in smoky rooms in university halls in the 19th century, during the golden age of colonial archaeology. In the 1840s, explorers from Britain and France, always Britain and France, wasn't it, began excavating mounds in Iraq. They unearthed ruins so old they thought they had discovered the Tower of Babel. Soon they found the Library of Ashurbanipal, thousands of clay tablets covered in wedge-shaped writing. And the race began to be the first to translate, to declare, to claim. And when Sumer became readable, quickly became canonical. A neat origin story. A cradle. But you've probably noticed that human history rarely fits into tidy cradles. It's more like a mosaic made from shards, half-remembered stories, and inconvenient ruins in the wrong places. Take for instance Göbekli, discovered in the 1990s in southeastern Turkey. This site consists of intricately carved stone pillars arranged in circles dating back to around 9,500 BC, over 5,000 years before the emergence of Sumer, before the wheel, before pottery, before agriculture, even before it was supposed to be possible. And yet there it stands. The pillars are massive, up to 20 foot tall and weighing more than 10 tons. Each is carved with images of animals, vultures, lions, boars, scorpions. But the most fascinating thing isn't what's there. It's what's missing. There are no signs of domestic life. No hearths, no homes, no trash pits. Just the sacred standing in stone. So we are left to wonder who built it and why. The standard view holds that civilization follows agriculture. First you settle down. Then you start farming. Then you build temples. But Beck seems to invert that logic. Here, people built temples first and perhaps farming came later to support the gatherings these temples hosted. That alone should rattle the foundations of every world history textbook. Even more curious, Göbekli was intentionally buried. Someone sometime covered the whole thing with earth and left it to sleep beneath the hills for 10 millennia. It was never meant to be found. This behavior is strange even by ancient standards. What culture builds a vast ceremonial complex over centuries, then carefully buries it? Some archaeologists suggest it was a ritual closure. Others whisper it may have been done in haste. To hide, to protect, or to forget. So, what does that mean for the story of civilization? It means the question isn't where did it begin, but perhaps what happened before it began again. There's a term in archaeology, cultural amnesia. It refers to the phenomenon where an entire civilization forgets or chooses to forget something fundamental. Technology's lost. Languages unlearned. The Antikythera mechanism, a device resembling a 2,000-year-old analog computer, had no precedent and no known descendants. It appeared and vanished like a hallucination of the future. Even the knowledge of concrete perfected by the Romans was lost for over 1,000 years. When European builders in the Middle Ages tried to recreate Roman aqueducts and domes, they lacked the materials and mathematics. And what of fire? That ancient friend. Even fire-making techniques have been lost and relearned countless times, from Stone Age flints to modern lighters. So, what happens if the whole system is lost? Not just a technology or two, but an entire civilizational package. There's a mysterious phenomenon that might offer a clue. It's called archaeological dark ages, periods where material culture vanishes from the record. One example is the time between the Neolithic and early Bronze Age in the Levant. People clearly lived there, but their tools and architecture almost disappear. Why? Scholars still debate whether this is due to real population collapse, climate change, or the biases of our excavation methods. We assume we've discovered everything important, but the truth is humbling. Most ancient sites are still buried, some under cities, some under seas. Others have crumbled beyond recognition. In Iraq alone, tens of thousands of mounds remain unexcavated, undocumented, unseen. And even when ruins are found, interpretation is its own battlefield. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians were innovators or inheritors. Did they create writing or refine an earlier pictographic system? Did they invent cities or rebuild them atop older ones? A curious fact. Archaeologists have discovered sediment layers beneath ancient Sumerian cities that show flood damage. Massive civilization destroying floods. Whole cities wiped clean, then rebuilt. Sounds oddly familiar, doesn't it? Now, here's a slightly more off-topic tidbit, just to let your mind wander while your eyes grow heavier. The oldest surviving written recipe isn't for bread or soup. It's for beer brewed by the Sumerians around 1800 B.C. They even had a goddess of beer, Ningi. The recipe was a hymn to her, which seems perfectly reasonable when you realize their beer was thick, unfiltered, and consumed with a straw. Because if you're rebuilding a world, why not start with something you enjoy? And then there's you lying here now, thinking about this swirling tangle of fragments and questions. The soft hum of uncertainty wrapping around you like a blanket. Why does this matter? Why should you care? What happened 10,000 years ago when the most pressing mystery in your life might be where you left your phone charger? Because deep down we all want to know where we came from. We want to feel the warm thread of continuity stretching from our fingers through the pages of time. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here, and tell me where in the world are you listening from and what time is it for you right now. Let's wander backward past the Sumerians, past the known, into the maybe. If you've ever watched an archaeologist's work, it's not what you'd expect. There's no dramatic pulling back of sheets from golden statues. No triumphant shouts of "we found it" accompanied by swelling orchestral music. It's mostly brushes, small trows, quiet pauses, measuring the earth one layer at a time. What they uncover is not just things, but time itself. Layers of time like a cake made by civilizations instead of sugar. The top layers are recent, Ottoman, Islamic, Roman. Beneath that, maybe Assyrian or Babylonian. But keep going. And under Babylon, you might find something that doesn't fit in the story. Something older than it's supposed to be. Take Eridu for example, one of the oldest known cities in southern Mesopotamia. On the surface, it looks like a clear chapter in the Sumerian saga. Temples rising in tiers. Mud brick structures. A city aligned with Enki, the god of water and wisdom. But the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Beneath the main ziggurat are earlier structures. 17 levels of temples stacked on top of one another. 17. And each one appears to have been built over the remains of the last. As if the city was reborn again and again from its own ashes. The earliest levels date back to nearly 400 B.C. And yet even their signs of organized religion, sacred architecture, and social planning appear. Not stumbling half-steps, but deliberate intent. Eridu challenges the notion that Sumerian civilization suddenly sprang to life in 3000 B.C. Instead, it suggests a deeper development, one that might stretch back thousands of years further than we thought. The same pattern is found at Duruk, a city more often celebrated as the birthplace of writing and kingship. Excavations show layers of settlement that predate the so-called Uru period. Pottery shards with unusual designs, tools that don't quite match known categories, hearths that suggest domestic life before the textbooks say it began. These aren't isolated incidents. In fact, throughout Mesopotamia, older layers of habitation keep peeking out beneath what we think of as firsts. Sometimes they're so different that archaeologists label them with caution: Presumerian, Proturban, or simply Ubi. The Ubaid culture is a quiet puzzle, flourishing from roughly 6,500 to 3,800 B.C. The Ubaid people built large settlements, used irrigation, and even produced standardized pottery. Some early Ubaid settlements like Tel Lubaid itself reveal complex buildings and central gathering places. They also buried their dead beneath their homes, a practice later seen in both Sumer and ancient Anatolia. Continuity perhaps or imitation. But here's the twist. In some Ubaid burials, archaeologists found skulls with unusual elongation, not the result of disease, but intentional cranial deformation. The practice has been found in many cultures: Peru, Egypt, Siberia. But in the Mesopotamian context, it's rare and still unexplained. Some claim it was a marker of elite status. Others whisper more speculative theories. But one thing is clear. These early people were shaping more than just pottery. They were shaping memory, identity, the very idea of who belonged. Now, a bit of a tangent. Did you know the earliest evidence for Chisholm is over 7,000 years old? Archaeologists in Poland found strainers with traces of milk fats dating back to 500 B.C., meaning that while the first cities were just beginning to sprout, someone was already enjoying cheese. Odd, isn't it? The way flavors outlive empires back to the deeper layers. One of the strangest discoveries came from Telra in northern Mesopotamia. It's a mound that at first glance looks like just another dusty ruin. But as researchers began digging, they noticed something strange in the soil. A concentration of small clay figurines. Thousands of them. These weren't decorative dolls or burial goods. They were scattered haphazardly, many with eerie large eyes, as if staring into the void. This place, now known as the Eye Temple, may predate Sumerian cities entirely, and yet it shows signs of ritual, of social organization, of something collective and shared. Historians still debate whether Tel Bra was a city in the traditional sense, or something more diffuse, perhaps a ceremonial center visited by scattered groups. But one thing is certain. It complicates the clean narrative of Sumerian supremacy. Here's where we pause to ask something softly. Why does it matter so much where civilization began? Why is there comfort in saying it started here at this time with these people? Is it about control? About the need for order in a story too vast to hold? The truth is, history resists tidy beginnings like a stream that divides and rejoins. It creates eddies and pools that may be overlooked for centuries. The idea of a singular cradle, be it Sumer, Egypt or the Indus Valley, has always been more convenient than conclusive. Even the Sumerians themselves referred to earlier times they called the antediluvian kings, rulers who lived before the Great Flood. According to their king list, these kings reigned for tens of thousands of years. Of course, scholars treat those numbers as myth. But why include them at all? What memory was being preserved even in exaggeration? The Erides, one of the oldest surviving Mesopotamian texts, describes a time when humanity lived without cities, ruled by gods. Then came the flood, And after that, cities were founded anew. That's a curious thing, isn't it? Even in the myths of the people we call the first, there are echoes of something older, something lost. Now, let's go underground for a moment. Into the earth itself. Archaeological cores taken from the ancient floodplains of Mesopotamia reveal layers of silt and clay consistent with massive inundation events. Not small seasonal floods, but regional altering deluges. One layer near Shuruppak dated to around 2900 BC matches the timing of several Sumerian flood myths. But here's the detail that keeps scholars up at night. Beneath that flood layer are the ruins of what appear to be older settlements. Ones that didn't survive the water. And yet life returned. Cities rose again with temples and scribes, and kings restarted like a book reopened after being closed too soon. It raises a quiet question. One you might let settle behind your eyes as sleep gently gathers. What if civilization didn't rise once, but many times? Each time leaving behind a layer, a memory, a buried route. If you were to dream of walking barefoot through the ruins of Eridu, past the cracked bricks and stone steps, past offerings left thousands of years ago, what would you hear? The wind? The voices of long-dead priests? Or just the silence of time folding over itself? Let it swirl. Let it soften. The story doesn't begin here. Simply continues. You might think that if there were a lost civilization before Sumer, we'd find monuments, towering structures, advanced tools, something unmistakable. But what if their fingerprints were subtler, etched into customs, buried in skulls, baked into bricks we never thought to question? To trace these elusive ghosts of history, we must go just before Sumer to a people with no written language and no empires, but with surprisingly sophisticated culture. The Ubaid. The Ubaid culture predates Sumer by over 1,000 years, thriving from around 6,500 BC to 3,800 BC. They built large settlements, had irrigation systems, crafted elegant pottery, and created expansive public buildings. Their settlements range from southern Mesopotamia up into the north, from Eridu to Tel Alubd, and even further into what's now Syria. They're often described as Presumerian, but that label is misleading. It's a placeholder, a polite academic shrug. What makes them truly strange is not what they left behind, but what they didn't. There are no grand palaces, no glorious temples inscribed with triumphs, no statues of rulers, no gold, no writing, just quiet sophistication. Structures made of mud brick, often with central courtyards and evidence of shared communal planning. Uniform pottery spread across vast distances. Early canal systems. Social stratification without the heavy hand of monarchy. Some historians describe them as the world's first civilizing. Their pottery changes. Their building patterns shift. New cultural elements appear. Uruk ceramics. Cylinder seals. Gods in human form. So, what happened to the Ubaid? One theory suggests cultural assimilation. As your culture expanded, it absorbed Ubaid traditions, incorporating them into the emerging Sumerian identity. Others speculate climate change or migration. Still others whisper more dramatically of a forgotten catastrophe. A war. Plague. A celestial event. And then there's the strangest detail of all. The skulls. At several Ubaid sites, including Tel Obad and Eridu, archaeologists uncovered burials with elongated skulls. These were not accidental deformities or post-mortem warping. These were shaped deliberately, often through cradle boarding or tight wrapping during infancy. The practice called cranial deformation has been found in cultures across the globe, from the Paracas people of Peru to the Huns of Central Asia. But its appearance here in the proto-history of Mesopotamia raises questions. Why would a proliterate people alter their children's skulls? Some researchers believe it was a sign of elite status. Others see it as a cultural or spiritual mark. perhaps to imitate gods or ancestral spirits. A few fringe thinkers even speculate about non-human influences. But we won't wander too far into those tall weeds just yet. Still, the Ubaid skulls have a haunting quality. Elongated, narrow, almost serpentine in appearance, combined with statuettes found at the same sites, some depicting humanoid figures with large eyes and lizard-like features. The aesthetic is eerie, almost alien. Of course, mainstream archaeologists interpret these figurines through a more grounded lens. Fertility idols, protective spirits, stylized art. Yet, even among professionals, there's little agreement. Scholars are still debating whether these figures represent deities, totems, or something else entirely. Let that linger. One curious fact: domesticated sheep and goats appear in the Ubaid period before any definitive evidence of large-scale farming in some areas. It's an inversion of what we expect. Herring after crops. Not before. Were these animals domesticated by the Ubaid themselves? Or did they inherit them? So, from whom? It raises the possibility that animal domestication, like writing or metal work, may not have had a single point of origin. Perhaps these practices survived the collapse of earlier societies, passed down like oral myths recalled dimly, relearned anew. There's a powerful silence in the Ubaid legacy. No wars recorded. No royal propaganda. No epic poems. Yet they seeded much of what would become Sumer. They dug the first canals. They organized labor. They standardized pots and tools. They laid out cities. Imagine walking into a modern city and finding no skyscrapers, no electronics, no roads, just small houses, clay pots, tools worn smooth with use. But everything is orderly, connected, intentional. You'd know there was something there. Some spark of civilization. But what kind? The Ubaid people left few monuments. But they may have left us something stranger. Template. A quiet rehearsal for the drama of kings and empires to come. And then they receded. There are other faint trails as well. In the marshes of southern Iraq, near the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates, dwell the Mudun or marsh Arabs. For centuries, they have built their homes out of reeds shaped into elegant arches that rise from the water like floating temples. Their lifestyle, fishing, rice farming, buffalo herding, has remained remarkably stable for thousands of years. Some archaeologists suggest that this way of life may be a survival of Ubaid traditions. If true, then in these swamps, time moves differently. History doesn't progress. It echoes. Now, drift eastward gently to Iran to a site called Tepek. Here, archaeologists uncovered ziggurat foundations that predate Sumerian equivalents by centuries. They found evidence of metallurgy, kiln-fired pottery, even signs of early trade networks. And then it goes quiet like so many other places. Pulse. Then silence. What if there were once dozens of civilizations like this? Small. Interconnected. Slowly experimenting with complexity until something broke the chain. There's a theory known as the pioneer bottleneck. It proposes that early human societies may have developed complex behaviors multiple times only to lose them. Not due to incompetence, but because of scale. A flood, a famine, a war. When you're only a few thousand people, any disaster can erase your story. And so, history leaves behind gaps. Not for lack of evidence, but because the evidence was small, biodegradable, or buried too deep. It's a humbling thought that much of early civilization may have been erased not by conspiracy but by compost. Now a detour. The oldest known human-made structure is not a pyramid or a ziggurat, but a circular stone monument in France called the Carrick Stones. Predating Stonehenge by 1,000 years. The site features thousands of aligned standing stones. Rows stretching for kilom. No writing. No tombs. Just arrangement. Intention. Like Göbekli. It suggests a world more coordinated than we give credit for. So we return to the Ubaid. whose echoes we still barely understand, who lived, built, irrigated, shaped skulls, buried their dead, and vanished without glory or collapse, just faded. What they left behind became the scaffolding for what came next. But they themselves remain unnamed, unclaimed, and largely unknown. It's easy to focus on the fireworks of history, empires rising and falling, kings crowned and overthrown. But beneath every throne is a foundation built by someone else. Someone who may never have worn a crown or left a name. Tonight, as you lie in the soft layers of your own comfort, think of those layers beneath Suma, the people who came before quietly building the world we would eventually inherit. Not lost, just sleeping. Some stories never go out of style, no matter the culture or language. The flood myth always finds its way into the telling. In these stories, water doesn't just rise. It remembers, judges. It sweeps away the world to start again. In the Sumerian king list, an ununiform document from ancient Mesopotamia listing dynasties and reigns, there's a curious line break. And then the flood swept over. Just like that. Time ends and begins again. It's tempting to call these flood tales mere metaphors. But what if they're not? The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Sumerian and Akkadian long before Homer ever dreamed of Odysseus, includes a vivid account of a global flood. In it, Utnapishtim, a clear prototype of Noah, is warned by a god to build a boat. He saves the seed of life. The gods weep at the destruction. The waters recede. A bird is released. You know the story. You've heard it in different accents. The Hebrew Bible tells the tale of Noah. Hindu scriptures describe Manu and his boat. The Aztecs speak of Tata and Nina who survive a flood in a hollow tree. The Ojibwa remember a deluge that wiped away the earth. And the Sky Woman who fell from the heavens. What unites them is not just the flood, but what comes after the reset, the restart. So, let's pause and ask, could there have been a real event? Perhaps not one flood, but a series of catastrophic sea level rises so traumatic, so transformative that it was encoded in the global subconscious. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth entered a sudden cooling event known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures dropped dramatically in a matter of decades, reversing the warming that had followed the last ice age. And then, just as suddenly, it ended about 11,600 years ago, ushering in the Holocene, the epoch we still live in today. What caused this abrupt shift? One hypothesis gaining traction is the Younger Dryas impact theory. A comet or asteroid striking the Earth triggering widespread fires, atmospheric blockage and ice sheet destabilization. While controversial, this theory is supported by the presence of nanodiamonds, iridium layers, and black carbon deposits across multiple continents. All signs of intense heat and high energy impact. Whether or not the comet struck, one thing is certain. Massive amounts of fresh water from melting glaciers poured into the oceans during this time. Sea levels rose over 120 m, globally between roughly 14,000 B. D and 8,000 B. C. Imagine that for a moment. Vast coastlines swallowed. Forests drowned. Whole island chains erased. Whatever early human settlements existed along those ancient shores were simply gone. Today, those ruins, if they exist, would lie far beneath the surface of the modern seas, along what is called the continental shelf. It's not a conspiracy. It's geology. One well-known example is the now submerged landmass called Doggerland, which once connected Britain to mainland Europe. At its height, it was a rich, fertile region filled with rivers, lakes, and forests. People lived there, hunted mammoths, and built tools. Then the North Sea rose, and Dog Island drowned. You might wonder, why don't we find more of these sunken cities? Well, we've only mapped a fraction of the ocean floor in detail. The deep sea holds its secrets tightly. It takes tremendous funding and technological effort to locate and excavate underwater ruins, especially when sediment, coral, and tectonic activity have hidden them for millennia. Still, there are tantalizing hints. Off the coast of India, near the modern city of Dwarka, sonar scans have revealed the outlines of geometric structures submerged beneath the Gulf of Cat. These include what appear to be foundations, walls, and even step-like formations. Initial excitement over the site in the early 2000s was tempered by controversy and political agendas. Subsequent studies have been inconclusive, but the idea lingers. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monument lies off the coast of Okinawa, a set of underwater stone formations with sharp angles, flat surfaces, and step-like terraces. Some geologists claim it's natural. Others argue for ancient modification. There is no consensus. In the Mediterranean, ruins like Heraklion and Pavlet-Petitri remind us that the sea reclaims what it wants. Heraklion, a wealthy Egyptian port city, sank into the Nile Delta over 1,000 years ago and remained lost until 2000. Pavlet-Petitri off the coast of Greece is over 5,000 years old. Streets, rooms, tombs, all now resting beneath a few meters of water. These are just the cities we've managed to rediscover. What lies beneath the Indian Ocean? The South China Sea, the Persian Gulf. Historians continue to debate how many advanced settlements might have been lost to post-glacial sea rise. The academic tension is clear. Some insist that urbanism only developed after 4000 BC. Others quietly leave space for earlier, now submerged experiments in civilization. And yet, if humans have been anatomically modern for at least 200,000 years, isn't it odd that we only began building cities 6,000 years ago? That's 97% of our history spent wandering, not building, not recording, unless we tried before. And the records were swept away. Here's a curious thought to rest your head on. During the Younger Dryas, sea levels didn't rise evenly. They surged in pulses, sometimes meters at a time. In flood myths, this is remembered not as erosion, but punishment, not as tide, but judgment. Somewhere in those stories, maybe as a memory of watching the sea crawl up and never go back. And still the stories continued. They passed from father to daughter, mother to son, not in ink, but in lobbies and ritual. Words you couldn't forget even if you tried. One more oddity and then we can drift. In Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes, there are submerged stone structures, massive platforms, and ruins that hint at a once lower lake level. How did they get there? Local myths tell of floods and falling stars. Modern science can't explain the dating with confidence. As always, uncertainty is the final companion. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the flood stories weren't just metaphors. Maybe they were survival guides disguised as myths. Ways to pass on the truth. That the sea is patient and that time is not always kind. Tonight, as you lie quiet and warm, let the memory of rising waters wash over you. Not in fear, but in reverence. For the earth has changed before and will change again. If there were civilizations before ours, they did not fall in fire or war. They drowned silently, completely. And maybe, just maybe, the survivors whispered a warning to their children who whispered it to theirs. Until someone someday wrote it down in clay or carved it into stone. And then the flood swept over. When the waves swallowed the world, the coastlines redrew themselves. Forests turned into salt marsh. Hills became islands. Villages vanished under the tide. And whatever stories those people told of stars and ancestors, of gods or calendars were swallowed, too. But not everything stays lost. All along the edges of our continents, at the margins where land once was, lie clues to what may have come before the civilizations we remember. It's there, offshore and half buried in coral, that the forgotten chapters of humanity's deep story may still rest. Let's begin near India in the Gulf of Cat. In the early 2000s, oceanographic surveys using Sitcon sonar detected rectangular and linear structures on the seabed at depths of 20 to 40 m. These shapes were not random. Long straight walls, grid-like formations, even a possible basin that some suggested could be a former reservoir or plaza. Artifacts recovered from nearby pottery shards. Stone tools were dated controversially to as far back as 9,000 years ago, long before the Harappan civilization. That alone would rewrite the timeline of Indian history. But there was a problem. The objects weren't found in situ. They were dredged from the ocean floor. And so the archaeological community fractured. Critics dismissed the site as a natural formation. Others demanded deeper peer-reviewed investigation. But the site remains difficult to access. An official exploration was abruptly paused. Still, the shapes remain. The sonar data hasn't vanished. And the whispers persist. Further south in Tamil Nadu lies Pumpuhar, an ancient city that once marked the mouth of the Kaveri River. Ancient Tamil texts speak of a great deluge that consumed the city. Divers have found stone structures off the coast, some aligned with early urban planning. The local legends recall a land called Kumari Kandam, a lost continent submerged beneath the Indian Ocean. Mainstream scholars dismiss Kumari Kandam as mythology, a regional Atlantis. Yet, it's notable how similar these tales are to flood myths from other parts of the world. Tales of a place that was old before time, swallowed by a rising sea. And then if you drift east to Japan to the island of Yonaguni, you'll find perhaps the most debated underwater formation in modern archaeology. At depths of 25 m lies what appears at first glance to be a massive stepped platform. Rows of geometric stone terraces, flat surfaces, and right angles. Some say it's a naturally fractured sandstone outcrop. Others are not so sure. Marine geologist Masaki Kamura argues that while the basic structure may be natural, elements of it appear to have been modified by human hands. Flat paving, post holes, pathways, and what look like staircase landings. He believes the site could be more than 10,000 years old. Opponents say it's pareidolia, a trick of the mind seeing patterns in rock. Yet those who dive there speak of an uncanny precision. The way the surfaces meet, the deliberate-looking lines, the scale. So, who's right? As with many things underwater, it's hard to say. Visibility is low, funding is limited, political will is lacking, and the academic risk of championing a sunken pre-Ice Age city is, well, career-ending. Still, the Onaguni Monument has become a quiet symbol of the tension between orthodoxy and curiosity, between what we are sure of and what we suspect. Elsewhere in the Pacific, the legends continue. In Micronesia, the megalithic city of Nan Madol, built on a coral reef with basalt blocks weighing up to 50 tons, rises eerily from the sea, though its accepted construction date is around 1,000 years ago. Local law claims it was built by giants or by spirits who flew the stones into place. No one knows where the stones came from. There are no nearby quarries, no roads. Even stranger, the site is built over a lagoon requiring an elaborate system of channels and artificial islands. It's a floating city, a place out of time. Now cross the globe to Cuba, where in 2001 a team scanning the seafloor between Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula discovered symmetrical stone structures nearly 700 m below the surface, far too deep for any known civilization. The images show blocks arranged in apparent geometric shapes, some up to several hundred meters across. Verified. Such ruins would predate not just Sabak Baklit. They would belong to a time when, according to textbooks, humans still hunted mammoths and sheltered in caves. So, what are they? No one knows. Access to the site was restricted. The original research was not continued. And like so many other inconvenient discoveries, it drifted quietly out of public attention. We must be careful. Of course, the ocean is vast. Nature can mimic intention. But it's also true that we've explored more of the moon's surface than our own seafloor. Less than 20% of Earth's oceans have been mapped in detail. In other words, we don't know what we don't know. Now, here's a delightful odd fact. In 1900, sponge divers off the Greek island of Antiqua stumbled upon the wreck of a Roman cargo ship. Amid statues and amphoe, they discovered corroded fragments of bronze gears. The anti-mechanism, the world's first known analog computer. It could track planetary positions, lunar phases, and eclipses. Built over 2,000 years ago, it was so sophisticated that no device of its kind appeared again until the 14th century. For decades, no one knew what it was. It took a century, X-rays, and mathematical modeling just to understand the basics of its functions. All from one shipwreck. Now, imagine how many ships rest on the ocean floor. How many stories lie waiting in the deep. One more place to visit before you sleep. Atlantis. Yes, that word conjures images of pseudoscience and glowing trident. But put aside the fantasy. Let's return to Plato, the Greek philosopher who first described Atlantis around 360 B.C. In his dialogues, Tamaris and Critias, Plato claimed that Atlantis was a powerful advanced civilization located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. He said it existed 9,000 years before Solon the Athenian lawgiver, placing Atlantis around 9,600 B.C. precisely when the Younger Dust ended and sea levels began to rise dramatically. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Plato preserved a story older than Greece. Older than writing. Passed down orally until someone finally committed it to ink. Historians still argue whether Atlantis was a moral allegory, a memory of the Minoan eruption at Santorini, or a garbled echo of a civilization lost to time. The debate remains open and heated. So tonight, we let the water settle around us. We imagine the ghost cities off forgotten shores, the temples beneath the tide, the myths passed down from those who once lived close to the sea and then watched the sea rise. If they did build cities before Sumer, we may never find their bricks, but we still have their stories carried in legend, preserved in myth, trapped in coral, and perhaps every now and then whispered back by the waves. There are moments in Earth's history when the rhythm of time is interrupted. A sudden chill in the air. A silence in the trees. A world that shifts almost overnight. One such moment came roughly 12,800 years ago, and we still don't fully understand why. It was the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling event that interrupted the warming trend following the last ice age. Before it struck, the world was thawing. Glaciers were retreating. Rivers roared with meltwater. The first signs of agriculture had begun to stir, and then cold. Within decades, maybe even less, global temperatures dropped dramatically. In some regions, the climate returned to near glacial conditions. It lasted over 1,000 years, and then just as sharply it ended. A sudden spike in the holy sign, our current era, began. But what caused the Younger Dry? For decades, scientists assumed it was a result of meltwater from the Laurentide ice sheet in North America, disrupting the Atlantic's ocean currents. A freshwater pulse entered the North Atlantic, weakening the thermal in circulation, which transports warm water northward. Without that heat engine, the Northern Hemisphere cooled rapidly. But around 2007, a new theory emerged, one far more dramatic. A team of researchers proposed the Younger Dust impact hypothesis, suggesting that fragments of a comet or asteroid slammed into Earth, triggering fires, atmospheric disturbance, and a rapid climate shift. According to their findings, evidence includes nanodiamonds formed under extreme pressure found in sediment layers dating to 12,800 years ago, microspherules, tiny glass-like particles created by intense heat. Scattered across North America and parts of Europe. A layer rich in iridium, a metal more common in space than on Earth. Found in ice cores and soil samples. A strange dark layer known as the black mat. Visible in archaeological sites. Separating late Pliene remains from Holocene materials. This black mat often coincides with the abrupt disappearance of the Clovis culture, one of the earliest widespread cultures in North America. Their distinctive spear points vanish from the archaeological record. And megapora like mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths begin to disappear shortly after. It's not proof, but it's suspicious. Critics of the impact hypothesis argue that some of the evidence can be explained by natural processes. Volcanic activity, wildfires, gradual climate change. Some claim the impact theory overstates the evidence. Others note that no obvious impact crater has been found dating precisely to the Younger Dust's onset. Still, some researchers believe the crater may lie under the ice of Greenland beneath the Hiwa Glacier, where a 31 kilometers wide impact structure was discovered in Ikebana-on-Sikis. While initial excitement suggested it could be linked to the Younger Dryas, further dating indicates it may be older or not. The debate as always continues. But let's step back. Even without a smoking crater, the period around 12,800 years ago was undeniably chaotic. The climate changed abruptly. Forests burned. Animal populations collapsed. And human societies, fragile and scattered, either adapted or vanished. Somewhere in this swirl of catastrophe lies a human memory. One that may have found its way into myths, rituals, and origin stories. Remember those flood myths? Many place the deluge at the end of a golden age just before the beginning of the world we know. Plato's Atlantis is said to have sunk around 9,600 B.C. just as the Younger Dust ended. The Sumerians spoke of a great flood that separated the old kings from the new. The Egyptians spoke of Zepi the first time, a mythical era before the current cycle. Could all of these be echoes of a forgotten impact? Climate crash. A night sky lit up with fire. It's tempting to dismiss such connections as coincidences. But it's worth asking. If humanity experienced a global trauma, how would the memory survive? In data? In monuments? Or in story? Let's visit Göbekli again. Its construction begins around 9,600 B.C., precisely at the close of the Young Eras. Some researchers, including Dr. Martin Swartman, have suggested that the carvings at Göbekli may record astronomical events, specifically a comet strike. One pillar, known as Pillar 43, or the Vulture Stone, features animal figures and celestial symbols. Swartman argues that these are zodiacal constellations, and that they describe a catastrophic encounter with debris from the Taurid meteor. It's a bold interpretation. Mainstream archaeologists remain skeptical, noting that Besip may be ritualistic but not necessarily scientific in purpose. Still, the site's timing emerging so suddenly after the Younger Dryas continues to puzzle researchers. How did hunter-gatherers without cities or agriculture build such monumental architecture? Perhaps they were not beginning but remembering, rebuilding, creating sanctuaries to honor or plate forces they didn't fully understand. And here's something odd and fascinating to tuck into your dreams. In Alaska, at a site called Cheese Bluff, there are layers of megaporna bones beneath black mat sediment, including mammoth and bison. Some bones are burned, shattered, or show signs of extreme heat. Not from human tools, but something more intense. Something like an air burst. This pattern repeats across North America. Sites with scorched animal bones. Rapid deposition of ash. A sharp divide between what came before and what came after. It's as though something wiped the slate clean. Not everywhere. Not all at once. But enough to scatter a people, silence a language, and alter the path of history. And the traditional Navajo tale of the worlds before. The first world was destroyed by fire from the sky. the second by a flood, the third by monsters. We now live in the fourth world. Scholars treat such stories as mythic metaphors. But sometimes myth remembers more than we expect. One more oddity before sleep. In ancient Egypt, the Dendera zodiac, a ceiling relief in the Temple of Hathor, depicts astronomical symbols, including what some believe to be a record of precessional cycles. That's the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis, something mainstream science only confirmed in modern times. If true, it suggests a deep inherited knowledge of cosmic motion. Historians continue to argue whether such interpretations are legitimate astronomy or poetic symbolism. But the carvings remain. So now, as you lie still, let your mind wander back. Not just thousands of years, but into the dark silence of the younger Dryas. Imagine the sky flickering with fire, the forest roaring into flame, the glaciers cracking and weeping into the sea. And imagine the survivors, those who fled to high ground, who buried their dead and whispered warnings into the night, who taught their children to remember the stars, the floods, the cold, and who may have built the first stone temples, not to begin civilization, but to hold on to what was left of the one before. Stories survive in strange places. They nest in the corners of lullabies, etched into beads, twisted into dance, and hidden in the grain of old songs. But perhaps no vessel is more resilient or more slippery than memory itself, especially when that memory is frozen in time. Some of our oldest memories may not come from books or clay tablets, but from the lips of elders sitting beside fires, passing on the world, not as it was seen, but as it was felt. The earth trembled, they said. The sky changed color. The sea swallowed the land. And then we began again. For a long time, historians dismissed such tales. Too metaphorical. Too poetic. But lately, something strange has been happening. The past is lining up with the myths. Let's begin. In Australia, among the Aboriginal peoples of Northern Australia, there are stories that speak of the sea coming in, of land that once stretched far into what is now open ocean, islands that are no longer islands, sand dunes that disappeared, names for places that no longer exist. In some regions, like the Tiwi Islands, stories have been passed down describing a time when the islands were connected to the mainland. Scientists now know that sea levels rose significantly around 7,000 years ago, flooding that very region. But here's the thing. These stories were passed down orally. No writing. No monuments. Just words held in memory for over 300 generations. One study by linguist Nicholas Reed and geographer Patrick Nunn catalogued more than 20 Aboriginal oral traditions that appear to preserve accurate memories of coastal submergence events, some going back over 10,000 years. That's not just folklore. That's geological data and verse. Historians still debate whether oral traditions can truly hold such precision over millennia. But it's harder now to simply wave them away. Travel now to South America, to the highlands of the Andes, where the Quechua and Aymara peoples tell tales of a time when the sun disappeared, a time when lakes burst, when mountains wept fire, when the sky fell. The Anian tradition of Pachacuti, literally world reversal, speaks of cycles of destruction and renewal, not unlike the Hindu Yuga cycles or the Aztec suns. Each era ends in cataclysm and the next begins. First, these sound like cosmic metaphors, but they echo geological events. In southern Peru and Bolivia, scientists have identified evidence of ancient glacial outburst floods, enormous torrents of meltwater released when ice dams failed. Some of these would have created sudden devastating surges through valleys, destroying anything in their path. In the Andes, where elevation varies wildly, a change in climate can transform the land overnight. A glacier melts a little too fast and an entire lake rushes down a canyon. If you were standing there when it happened, would you call it anything less than the end of the world? Even in Europe, echoes remain in Scotland. The sulky legends of seal people who shed their skins and walk on land may contain memories of rising seas, of coastlines receding, of a people who once lived where the sea now rules. The Dog Allen theory, which we've touched on, gives new weight to this. As the North Sea swallowed the land bridge between Britain and Europe, it's not hard to imagine people watching their world slip beneath the tide, interpreting it not in geological terms, but in stories. And in North America, among the Dene, the Hopi, the Inuit, and many others, myths speak of great cold, of floods, of fire from the sky. The Hopi tell of 3 worlds before ours, each destroyed by imbalance. One by fire, one by ice, one by water. Sound familiar? Some of these stories mirror the climate chaos of the Younger Dryas, which we explored in the last part. But now we understand the knowledge of those events may not be lost. It may simply be encoded differently. Not in stone, but in song. In Iceland, the sagas remember volcanoes long before seismographs. In Indonesia, oral histories described tsunamis centuries before the word tsunami was coined. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, researchers discovered that in some regions, villagers survived because of inherited stories warning them to flee inland when the sea pulled back suddenly. That's not just narrative. That's survival. Here's a peculiar fact to sleep on. In 2012, a group of researchers studying Greenland's ice cores discovered a distinct spike in platinum concentration dating to, you guessed it, around 12,800 years ago. Platinum is rare on Earth's surface, but abundant in comets. This supports the theory of a cosmic impact triggering the Younger Dryas. And while the platinum settled in the ice, stories were settling into the bones of humanity. One might say that Earth recorded the impact in its frozen archives and humans recorded it in memory. The two records, ice and story, are now beginning to align. But not all stories are preserved. Many are lost. In North America, the Clovis culture, once considered the continent's earliest inhabitants, disappeared suddenly around 12,800 years ago. Their signature spear points stop appearing. Their campsites go quiet. Some suggest climate change drove their prey, mastodons, into extinction, which in turn broke the Clovis economy. Others suspect something faster, more violent. Some sites suggest firestorms, layers of soot and charcoal. As we've seen, this overlaps neatly with the so-called black mat layer. But if the Clovis people were destroyed in a flash, who remembered them? Maybe no one. Maybe the stories died with them. Or maybe fragments survived. In the Pacific Northwest, Native American tales speak of a time when the land burned and the animals fled. In the Southwest, the Zori recall a sun that went out. The Klamath people of Oregon describe a battle between spirits that ends with fire raining down. A story now linked to the eruption of Mount Mazama, which formed Crater Lake around 700 years ago. These stories are not just poetic. They are geological memories stored in human hearts. And while the scientific community remains divided on how long oral traditions can truly persist, one thing is clear. We've underestimated them. We've called them legends, fables, children's tales. But perhaps they're libraries, ones that whisper rather than shout. Tonight, think of memory not as a photograph, but as a song. One passed from voice to voice, reshaped with each telling, but still carrying the melody of truth. Think of how much we've lost and how much may still be hidden. Not in ruins, but in lullabies, tattoos, carvings, star maps, and dreams. If civilizations before ours did fall, perhaps their final legacy wasn't a monument, but a warning wrapped in story waiting to be heard. There are places in the world where stone doesn't just sit, defies, blocks too large to move, cuts too precise to have been made with copper. Structures that seem to whisper, not of the past, we know, but of something older, something harder to explain. These are the so-called impossible ruins, and they lie scattered across continents like puzzle pieces that don't quite fit. Let's begin in Baalbek, Lebanon. At the base of the Roman temple complex, there is a platform called the Trilithon, made of 3 limestone blocks, each weighing around 800 tons. Above them rest smaller Roman stones, neatly fitted like toppings on an ancient cake. But no one quite knows how the Trilithon got there. The quarry from which they were carved lies nearly a kilometer away. No wheel or animal of the time could have moved them. Even modern cranes would struggle. And yet they sit perfectly aligned as though placed by a hand that never trembled. Some scholars argue the platform predates the Roman temple entirely, built by an earlier culture that vanished without a name. Others suggest it's simply the product of genius Roman engineering. But here's the problem. There's no documentation. Romans wrote everything down. Construction manuals, architectural treatises, even recipes. And yet no mention of how or why they built on blocks heavier than anything else in their empire. Historians are still debating whether these lower megaliths were part of an earlier temple complex. Perhaps Phoenician. Perhaps even older. Some fringe researchers go further, proposing pre-cataclysmic civilizations with forgotten technologies. What remains is stone and silence. Travel next to Peru to the site of Sacsayhuaman above the city of Cusco. Here, wolves snake across the highlands like the vertebrae of some giant stone beast. The blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, are fitted together with such precision that not even a blade of grass can slide between them. No mortar, no joints, just pure interlocking stone, shaped with gentle curves and deep keystones. Earthquake-resistant, storm-proof, time-proof. Mainstream archaeologists attribute Sacsayhuaman to the Inca. And indeed the upper levels of the wall show classic Inca construction. But the largest blocks at the bottom seem older, different, as if they were inherited, as if someone else started the wall and the Inca simply continued. The same pattern appears at Ontide and fitted into terraces. No roads, no wheels, only theories. One of the most peculiar is Puma Punku, part of the Tiwanaku complex in Bolivia. Here, enormous andite stones are shaped into intricate interlocking geometries, right angles, grooves, and channels as though machined. Some of the stones appear to have been sliced, not chipped, and is extremely hard, harder than the tools traditionally attributed to the builders. How then were these cuts made? Skeptics argue that with enough time and effort, even stone can be shaped using sand, rope, and water. But others point out that the precision, particularly in the H-blocks, suggests an understanding of geometry and engineering far beyond what should have existed there in 500 CE. Could these be remnants of a lost tradition? A forgotten school of stonework passed down from a deeper past? Some researchers note that after a certain point, many Anian civilizations stopped building megalithically. Later structures were smaller, rougher, less ambitious, as though knowledge had been lost or deemed no longer necessary. Now drift east to Egypt, where beneath the grandeur of the pyramids lies an even older mystery, the Oscaryon, located at Abydos. The Oscaryon is a subterranean temple that resembles no other Egyptian construction. Its granite blocks, some over 100 tons, form a narrow hall lined by monolithic pillars set deep into the bedrock. Strangely, the architectural style of the Orient is more primitive than surrounding temples. Even though it was supposedly built by Seti I in the 13th century B.C., Seti's own temple lies nearby, filled with delicate carvings and hieroglyphs. The Orient, in contrast, is austere, heavy, cyclopean. Many Egyptologists believe Seti merely repurposed the structure, adding inscriptions to a building already ancient in his time. There is no definitive record of who first built it. It's a pattern we see again and again. Later cultures inheriting sites, adding layers, taking credit. But the oldest parts, the heaviest stones, remain anonymous. And it's not just the scale, it's the intentionality. These weren't random boulders. They were cut, shaped, transported, and aligned, which leads us to a question you've likely whispered to yourself by now. How? How did ancient builders lift hundreds of tons without cranes? How did they cut granite and andesite without steel? How did they design foundations that still resist earthquakes today? Some suggest forgotten technologies, advanced knowledge of leverage, sound frequencies, or even lost alloys. Others speculate about anti-gravity, sound levitation, or even outside intervention. But those theories, while exciting, are still speculation. Let's stay grounded. In India, the temples of Ellora and Ajanta were carved directly into cliffs, not built stone by stone, but subtracted from solid rock. The Khasa temple, for example, was chiseled from a single piece of basalt, roof, pillars, shrines, and all. An estimated 200,000 tons of rock were removed by hand. Mainstream archaeologists attribute this to the Rashtrakuta dynasty around 700 CE. But how was such a feat accomplished with no explosives, no machines, and no precise blueprints? Even if the traditional timeline holds, it suggests an astonishing degree of engineering, patience, and vision, and it echoes a deeper pattern: monumental effort for spiritual purpose. As if the act of building was the ritual. Let's pause for something strange. Gobasi, the world's oldest known temple. The builders not only raised 20-ton pillars, they buried them intentionally after centuries of use. Not collapsed, not abandoned, but ceremonially sealed under tons of dirt. Why? Some believe it was an act of reverence. Others suggest the builders feared the site or wanted to preserve it. Perhaps they sensed the end of something. A closing chapter. Which brings us full circle. What if these impossible ruins were not just buildings, but memorials? Markers of a world already in decline. Civilizations not at their peak, but at their last gasp, preserving what they could before it faded. Historians still debate whether the megalithic tradition was born in one place and spread, or arose independently across the globe. But the similarities are haunting. Giant stones, precise cuts, sacred alignments, and then silence. Tonight, as you lie still, think of the quiet hands that shaped granite in the highlands of Peru, the eyes that watched stars through stone circles in Anatolia, the feet that walked across limestone blocks in Lebanon. They may not have left books, but they left weight, lines, angles, messages in megaliths. And maybe they built not for us, but for the sky. There's a word that sends archaeologists into fits of either excitement or exasperation. A word wrapped in myth, misused in conspiracy, and misinterpreted for centuries. Atlantis. Say it in any room full of historians, and you'll feel the temperature change. Someone will roll their eyes. Someone else will smile politely. Few might leave. And yet, the story refuses to die. Because buried beneath the waves of speculation, there's something about Atlantis that still tugs at the edge of our imagination. Maybe it's because it represents a universal longing. A golden age lost to time. A perfect world that fell. Or maybe it's not a metaphor at all. Let's return to the source. Not modern pseudoscience. Not alien temples. Just Plato. In 360 B.C., Plato wrote 2 dialogues, Tus and Critias. In them, he describes a powerful island nation beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Atlantis, he said, was vast, rich, and advanced. Its people grew arrogant and corrupt, and in a single day and night the island sank into the sea. Importantly, Plato doesn't claim this as his own invention. He attributes the story to Solon, a revered Athenian lawgiver who visited Egypt around 600 B.C. Their priests reportedly showed him records inscribed in hieroglyphs of a mighty civilization that existed 9,000 years before Solon's time. That place is Atlantis. Friel. Around 9,600 B.C. The same date we've encountered again and again. The end of the Younger Dus. The beginning of the Holy Sign. The time of rising seas. Is it coincidence? Some scholars think Plato simply made it up. A political parable warning Athens not to become too proud. After all, Critias is unfinished, and Plato's works often use fiction to teach. But here's the strange part. When Plato wrote about Atlantis, he described specific details: ringed harbors, abundant elephants, metals unknown to the Greeks, and fertile plains. He mentioned dimensions, stadia, miles, measuring canals and temples. It's oddly specific for a mere allegory. And when we compare those details to real places, patterns emerge. Let's examine Minoan Crete, specifically the city of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. Around 1600 B.C., a massive volcanic eruption, one of the largest in human history, obliterated the city and collapsed part of the island into the sea. Akrotiri was wealthy, artistic, technologically advanced, and maritime. Some argue this disaster inspired the Atlantis myth. It's plausible, but the date is far too late for Plato's timeline. And the scale, while dramatic, doesn't match. Others have proposed to Tessos, an ancient city in southern Spain near the Guadalave River Delta, rich in tin and gold with unclear origins. It was known to the Phoenicians, and some believe it fits Atlantis' geographic hints. But Tartessos was Bronze Age. Again, too late. Which leads us to a bold possibility. What if Plato wasn't referencing Santorini or Tartessos? What if he really was echoing something from 9,600 BC? A memory passed down orally for millennia. Seems impossible. But as we've seen, Aboriginal Australians remembered sea level rise from 10,000 years ago. Could Mediterranean civilizations have done the same? There's a location that fits the timeline. A place that in the last ice age was above water, fertile, large, and now lies drowned. The Azores Plateau. Today, the Azores are a volcanic island chain in the mid-Atlantic. But during the Ice Age, sea levels were over 120 m lower. Vast portions of the plateau would have been above water. It's not hard to imagine a maritime culture thriving there. Trading, sailing, watching the stars until it was swallowed by the rising sea. Sonar mapping of some areas has revealed curious formations, terraces, lines, geometric shapes. But confirmation is elusive. The depth, currents, and remoteness make study difficult. And so the debate continues. Let's take a detour to the Bimini Road, a submerged rock formation near the Bahamas. It consists of large flat limestone blocks laid out in a linear pattern about 800 m long. Discovered in 1968, it sparked immediate claims of an ancient road or even part of Atlantis itself. Geologists argue it's natural beach rock fractured by erosion. But some divers insist the stones are placed too evenly with beveled edges and corner joints. Perhaps it's natural. Perhaps not. What matters is that it adds to a growing list of sunken structures, lost islands, memories and myth. Historians still debate whether Plato's Atlantis was a distorted recollection of a real event, a composite of various cultures, or a complete invention. But if it was invented, came from somewhere. Cultures don't imagine destruction on that scale unless they've seen it. And here's something curious. Plato wasn't the only one. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, there's mention of a land called Sepi. The first time, a golden age when gods walked the earth, when the Nile flowed differently, when the sky aligned perfectly. It ended in catastrophe and history restarted. In India, there's Kumari Kandam, a submerged continent in Tamil mythology that housed an advanced society. The stories say it sank beneath the sea after a deluge. In Mesoamerican tradition, there were 5 suns, ages of the world, each destroyed in turn. One by jaguars, one by wind, one by fire, one by flood. And now we live in the 5th. Why are these stories so consistent? Why do so many begin with a golden age followed by destruction and a reset? Maybe because something like that did happen. Maybe more than once. Or maybe humanity just knows deep in its bones that nothing lasts forever. One more fact to lull you. In 2001, a study published in Nature confirmed a massive sudden rise in sea level around 200 years ago, caused by a glacial lake bursting into the North Atlantic. It raised sea levels globally by several meters in just a few years. Entire coastlines disappeared. Sound familiar? Whether Atlantis was real, metaphor, or both, it holds power. Not because we need it to be true, but because we recognize its pattern. A great civilization, fall, forgetting, and the quiet hope that someone someday might remember. So tonight, drift gently into the waters beyond Gibraltar. Past the noise, past the skepticism. Let yourself stand on the white stone docks of a forgotten city where elephants once walked and temples gleamed in the sun. Maybe it never existed. Or maybe it's just sleeping, waiting to be found again. There is a particular kind of silence that follows the destruction of knowledge. Not the silence of peace, but of absence. A stillness left behind when words vanish. Languages die, and no one remembers what was once remembered. Tonight we visit the libraries that no longer exist. Vaults of memory burned and buried. The Great Forgetting. We begin inevitably in Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria was the crown jewel of the ancient world. Established in the 3rd century B.C. by the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. It was intended to collect all human knowledge. That was the literal goal. To gather every scroll, every treatise, every idea in existence. Ships arriving in port were searched and any texts found were copied. The originals went to the library. The copies were returned. A polite theft of civilization. It said the library held over 400,000 scrolls. Possibly more. Works from Mesopotamia, Greece, India, and beyond. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy. Histories of places we no longer know the names of, and then it was gone. We don't know exactly how the Library of Alexandria was destroyed. Some blame Julius Caesar, whose siege in 48 B.C. may have sparked fires that reached the library. Others point to later waves of destruction. Christian mobs in the 4th century. Muslim conquest in the 7th. It may not have died all at once. It may have withered, starved of care. Scrolls moldering into dust. Historians still debate whether the main library and its daughter institutions were ever truly unified or if the death was gradual and bureaucratic. Either way, it's gone, and with it 1,000 answers to questions we've long since stopped asking. But Alexandria was not alone. In Assyria, the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, discovered in the 19th century, contained over 30,000 clay tablets. Here was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Here were medical texts, omens, star charts. This library, miraculously preserved in fired clay, gives us glimpses of what was lost elsewhere. But even Ashurbanipal's collection was selective. What didn't survive? What wasn't copied? What knowledge fell between the cracks of uniform? And then there's Pergamon, another great library once a rival to Alexandria. Legend says the competition became so fierce that Egypt banned the export of papyrus. Pergamon responded by inventing parchment, vellum made from animal skin. Innovation born from rivalry. The Pergamon library held over 200,000 000 volumes. Mark Antony supposedly gifted them to Cleopatra. Where did they go? Nobody knows. It's an eerie pattern. Libraries built. Libraries burned over and over. The Maya had libraries. Collections of folded bark books filled with glyphs, numbers, and star charts. But when the Spanish arrived, Bishop Diego Dander ordered them destroyed. He said, "We found a great number of books, but since they contain nothing but superstitions and lies of the devil, we burned them all." Only 4 Maya goddesses survive today. In China, the first emperor Qin Shang ordered the burning of many Confucian and historical texts around 213 B.C. He sought to unify ideology. One history, one memory. The others could go. And in Rome, the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, which held sacred records and histories, was burned multiple times. Each time something irreplaceable disappeared. It's almost as though history has a natural predator, fire. But not all forgetting comes from flame. Sometimes it's neglect or secrecy. The Vatican's secret archives, now renamed the Apostolic Archives, hold some of the oldest and rarest documents in the world. Millions of pages across miles of shelving. Some are accessible. Others are not. Some are cataloged. Others are forgotten. Even by the Church itself. We don't know everything that's inside. Papal Lost Gospels. Trial records of the Knights Templar. But whispers persist of older texts. Egyptian scrolls. Babylonian tablets. Records from civilizations that no longer exist. Do they exist? No one can say. But the idea itself is telling. Even in modern times, we believe that something precious lies hidden, sealed, withheld. Why? Because we know what's already been lost. A curious fact. In the ruins of Hat Issa, the ancient capital of the Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists uncovered thousands of clay tablets. Among them was a treaty, the oldest known international peace treaty between the Hittites and the Egyptians, dated to 1259 B.C. It is written in both Hittite and Egyptian. A bilingual agreement. The copy in Egypt is inscribed on the walls of Karnak. The Hittite version was preserved in the ground. Had it not survived, we might not believe such diplomacy existed at that time. This treaty is a flicker of what else may have been known, exchanged, recorded, and what we may never see again. Imagine what was lost in Mesopotamian cities whose libraries were never excavated, or in coastal regions submerged by sea level rise, or in South American sites looted before they were even mapped. And here's an off-topic but telling detail. Some of the Sumerian tablets we now study were once used as construction material packed into walls as filler. The scribes who composed them might have imagined their words lasting forever. Instead, they became insulation. 1,000 years later, we dig them out and piece them together, trying to remember what they once meant. It's enough to make you wonder how much of our own knowledge is being quietly buried. What digital libraries? What servers? What networks will vanish when the power goes out? Historians continue to debate whether civilization is cumulative, each generation building on the last, or cyclical, with peaks and collapses that erase the slate. The truth, perhaps, is both. We build. We forget. We build again. The ruins whisper. The fires take what they want. And the most tragic part, we often don't know what we've lost until it's too late to miss it. So as you rest tonight, imagine yourself in a cool stone room, shelves stretching upward, filled with scrolls, tablets, books whose languages you can't read. Each one a thought, a memory, a glimpse of something once known, then a flicker of flame and ash. Long after cities have crumbled, after languages have gone extinct and books have turned to dust, there is still one record that remains. Not carved in stone, not written in ink, but coded into life itself. Your DNA. It's not just a string of biological instructions. It's a time capsule. One that stretches back thousands. No. Hundreds of thousands of years. It remembers things you've never seen. Places you've never been. And ancestors you didn't know you had. And sometimes it tells stories that conflict with the ones we read in history books. Let's start with the basics. For decades, the dominant model in anthropology was that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago, gradually migrating across the globe. Along the way, they encountered and out-competed other hominins like Neanderthals and Denisovans. These relatives were assumed to have disappeared completely. But that's not quite what happened. In the early 2010s, the Human Genome Project and its successes revealed a surprise. Almost every person of non-African descent carries around 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. People in Asia and Oceania also carry traces of Denisovan DNA. Up to 5% in some Melanesian populations. We didn't just replace them. We interbred. And that means their memory, genetic memory, lives on. The implications are vast. Some of those ancient genes affect immune response. Others relate to skin pigmentation, metabolism, and even circadian rhythm. Traits shaped by an Ice Age world. Traits selected for survival. But there's more. A 2019 study discovered a mysterious ghost population in West Africa. Unknown archaic homins who contributed up to 19% of the genetic ancestry in some modern populations. No fossils. No name. Just echoes in the genome. Who were they? We don't know. The data suggests they diverged from our lineage over 1 million years ago. And yet, somehow contact happened somewhere. Somewhere. Historians and geneticists still debate how to interpret these findings. Some propose complex migratory waves that rise and fall like forgotten tides. Others argue for lost populations wiped out in ways we can no longer trace. The genome doesn't lie. But it's also not easy to read. It's a language of probabilities, not certainties. And sometimes it reveals things that feel like science fiction. For example, haplogroup X, a mitochondrial DNA lineage, shows up in both Europe and North America, particularly among the Ojibwa and Sioux tribes. Yet, it's rare or absent in Eastern Asia, where we would expect it if all Native American ancestors crossed via the Bering Land Bridge. Some researchers suggest this points to a more complex pattern of migration, perhaps involving Atlantic crossings or forgotten northern routes. Others dismiss it as a statistical quirk. But the question lingers. Then there's the Denisova Cave in the Alai Mountains of Siberia. In this single site, we find the DNA of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, not just in different layers, but overlapping. In 2018, scientists sequenced the genome of Deni, a 13-year-old girl who lived over 90,000 years ago. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. She was a hybrid, proof that the barriers between species were more porous than we imagined. But these interminglings didn't happen in a vacuum. They suggest shared territories, possibly shared cultures. What if knowledge was exchanged alongside genes? What if forgotten civilizations didn't just emerge from Homo sapiens, but from these merged lineages? Groups blending tools, traditions, stories. It's difficult to say. Prehistoric societies didn't leave written records, but they may have left art. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, cave paintings of animals and handprints have been dated to over 45,000 years ago, some of the oldest in the world. Similar artwork appears in Europe, Africa, and Australia, all created by different groups, separated by oceans and epochs. Yet the themes are eerily similar. Hands, animals, abstract symbols, constellations. This suggests either a shared symbolic capacity or a shared memory older than we can trace. Perhaps artistic expression too is something we carry in our bones. And then there are the haplotypes. clusters of genetic markers that hint at ancient bottlenecks. Events that nearly wiped out humanity. One such event may have occurred around 70,000 years ago, possibly linked to the Toba supereruption in Indonesia, the largest volcanic explosion in the last 2 million years. The resulting ash cloud darkened skies for years. Crops failed. Populations plummeted. Some researchers believe that the total number of humans fell to fewer than 10,000 breeding individuals, a near-extinction event. And yet, we survived and carried those scars forward. Curiously, similar bottlenecks appear in other species: cheetahs, elephants, even chimpanzees, as if the Earth itself reset a portion of life. And the survivors restarted. One odd genetic trait you might not have heard of is the AMY1 gene, which helps humans digest starch. Populations with a history of farming or high-starch diets tend to have multiple copies of this gene. But what's strange is that some ancient populations already had it before agriculture supposedly began. This raises the possibility that pre-agricultural humans were already processing grains, perhaps using grinding stones, baking flatbreads, brewing rudimentary beer. We found 14,000 old breadcrumbs in Jordan. That's 4,000 years before the invention of farming. Did they learn these techniques alone? Or were they preserving older knowledge? Even stranger is the presence of lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk into adulthood. This trait emerged independently in several populations. It's a genetic adaptation, sure, but one that only spreads if people are already consuming dairy. It's a chicken and egg problem. Why would people develop the ability to digest milk unless they were already drinking it? And why would they do that unless animals had already been domesticated? Perhaps domestication itself was not invented once, but reinvented or inherited. Genetic studies of dogs show that they were domesticated at least twice, possibly more, and then hybridized. The earliest known dog burial in Germany dates back 14,000 years with evidence that the animal was cared for during illness. That's more than a pet. That's kinship. In your genes are traces of those who came before you. Farmers, warriors, artists, wanderers, but also survivors. Survivors of ice, flood, fire, and famine. Carriers of forgotten languages. Remembers of rituals you no longer perform. Somewhere in your cells is a spark that once lit a fire in a cold cave, and still glows. So, as you rest, think of the long chain of hands that brought you here. Hands that till soil, buried their dead, watched the stars, and passed on the only thing that survives everything. Not monuments, but memory. Before there were skyscrapers, before steel, before cities, there were stars. Long before humanity built pyramids or temples, we built calendars traced not on paper but across the sky. And when we gaze upward today, we are peering into the same cosmic field where our ancestors once charted time, told stories, and perhaps remembered a civilization far older than we allow ourselves to believe. Let's begin at a quiet stone circle lost in the hills of southern Turkey. Göletip. Again, you've heard its name before. And for good reason. At over 11,000 years old, predates Stonehenge by at least 6,000 years. Its enormous T-shaped pillars are carved with foxes, vultures, serpents, and abstract symbols. Many archaeologists still call it a temple, but a growing group believes it may have also functioned as an observatory. One pillar in particular, Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, has been interpreted by some researchers like Dr. Martin Swartman as a record of a cosmic impact. Others see it as a kind of zodiac, a sky map showing positions of constellations as they appeared 10,950 B.C. That's nearly 13,000 years ago. This interpretation remains controversial, but it reflects a growing awareness in archaeology. Ancient people weren't just superstitious stargazers. They were astronomers, patient and precise, tracking celestial rhythms long before telescopes. Across the globe, similar sites appear. Megalithic alignments tied to the solstices, the equinoxes, the lunar standstills. These weren't accidents. In Napa, Egypt, a circle of stones set deep in the desert align with the summer solstice and with Orion's belt, dating to at least 6000 B.C. and possibly much earlier. The site also includes burials, cattle cults, and ceremonial features, suggesting a complex society with spiritual and scientific motives. Even the Great Pyramid of Giza, if we dare to look more closely, is aligned to within a fraction of a degree with true north. Its sides are astronomically oriented, and its shafts, those narrow passageways that pierce through solid stone, point towards stars that held symbolic power in ancient Egyptian cosmology. How did they achieve such precision without compasses? How did they map the heavens without instruments? Some say observation. Others suggest tools we've yet to find or knowledge passed down from an earlier epoch. Historians continue to debate whether these alignments were practical or ritualistic, if they served calendars or theology. But perhaps the distinction doesn't matter. In the ancient world, science and spirit were not separate. In Ireland, Newgrange, a Neolithic passage tomb built around 3200 B.C., contains a long corridor aligned with the winter solstice sunrise. On that day, light pierces the darkness and floods the inner chamber. It's a cosmic event written in stone. No metal, no writing, just knowledge passed from eye to eye, year after year, until it was etched into the bones of the earth. Across the Atlantic, Cho Canyon in New Mexico is filled with massive buildings aligned to solar and lunar events. The sun dagger on Farta Butte marks both the summer solstice and equinox with slivers of light passing through rock. Its builders, the ancestral Pueblones, left no written records, but their architecture speaks in light and shadow. And in the Peruvian desert, the Nazca lines stretch for miles. Geometric shapes, animals, straight paths that lead to nowhere. Some align with solstices. Others point to specific mountain peaks. Theories range from ritual pathways to astronomical calendars. No one knows for sure. But the impulse is clear. To mark the sky. To make sense of time. To align ourselves with the cosmos. Even the Mare, often remembered for their calendar doom myths, possessed an astonishing understanding of astronomy. Their priests tracked Venus with incredible precision, so much so that their calculations of the planet cycle rival modern tables. They knew solar eclipses would happen. They recorded them in codices alongside rituals and prophecies. And they built entire cities like Mal and Chichen Itza with pyramids and observatories that catch the sun and moon in exact rhythms. In India, the Vanga Gaudisha, written around 1200 B.C. and perhaps based on older oral traditions, lays out rules for tracking the moon and stars. Hindu cosmology divides time into vast cycles, yugas, that stretch across hundreds of thousands of years. It's not just mythology, it's a deep time reckoning. And the Dune people of Mali, West Africa, have long claimed knowledge of the Sirius star system, including Sirius B, a dense white dwarf invisible to the naked eye. Their traditions describe it as a heavy companion star with an elliptical orbit, details only confirmed by Western astronomy in the 20th century. How did they know? Anthropologists argue it may have been a coincidence or information filtered through colonial contact. But the possibility lingers. Perhaps they remember something older. Something whispered across centuries. Even in China, ancient star charts from the Shang dynasty, etched onto oracle bones, show constellations with stunning clarity. They named supernova, tracked comets, predicted eclipses. Astronomy was not merely curiosity. It was statecraft, spirituality, survival. Now, here's something off topic, but revealing. In 2013, Archaeologists studying the megalithic site of Gunung Padang in Indonesia uncovered evidence that parts of the structure may date back more than 9,000 years, buried beneath younger layers. If true, it would be one of the oldest artificial constructions on Earth. And some of the stone arrangements appear to align with celestial events. But like so many findings that challenge orthodoxy, Gunung Padang sits in the gray zone, awaiting further study shrouded in controversy. Historians still debate whether early civilizations independently developed their astronomical systems, or if they stem from a forgotten shared source. An Earth civilization whose knowledge was scattered after a great cataclysm. It may be wishful thinking, or it may be memory hiding in patterns. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine yourself beneath a sky without streetlights. A sky so dark, the Milky Way isn't a faint smear. It's a river of fire. You lie on a stone slab aligned to the solstice, watching the stars arc across the heavens. Just as your ancestors did. They watched patiently, not for days, but for lifetimes. And what they saw, they carved into rock, aligned their temples, tuned their myths, not to dominate the stars, but to live with them. Because to ancient people, the sky wasn't distant. It was home. Not all ancient knowledge is buried beneath the ground. Some of it lies in plain sight, spread across old parchment, traced in fading ink, etched into copper plates. We call them maps, and we trust them to tell us where we've been. But sometimes they tell us things we shouldn't know. Take the Peri Reis map, perhaps the most famous of these unsettling topographic artifacts. Drawn in 1513 by Ottoman Admiral Peri Reis, this partial world map shows parts of Europe, North Africa, and the coast of South America. But its most curious feature lies far to the south. A detailed representation of what appears to be Antarctica. Not as the frozen ice-covered continent we know today, but as a mostly ice-free landmass with mountain ranges and river systems. This raises questions. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and even then its coastline remained largely uncharted for another century. How could a 16th-century sailor have mapped it so accurately? And more unsettling, how could he have known what lies beneath the ice when modern radar imaging has only recently confirmed those same land features? Peri Reis himself claimed the map was compiled from older source materials, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. What were these maps? Who made them? And how did they chart a continent buried under miles of ice? Geologists tell us that the last time parts of Antarctica were ice-free was over 6,000 years ago and possibly as far back as 13,000 years ago during the tail end of the Younger Dust. If the Peri map does depict that ancient coastline, it suggests the source materials were made by someone who saw it. Someone with ships, knowledge of latitude, and a reason to record the edges of the Earth. Historians still debate whether the map truly shows Antarctica. Some argue it's just a distorted view of South America. But the resemblance to Queen Moor Land, a portion of Antarctica's actual coast, is striking. And the map's precision, particularly in latitude, exceeds the abilities of 16th-century navigators. It's not the only one. The Orance map of 1531 also shows Antarctica with remarkable detail. Like Pyrrhus, it features rivers, bays, and even mountain ranges. Again, well before the continent was discovered. Again, attributed to older sources. And then there's the Bocchi map of 1737 created by French geographer Philippe Boich. It divides Antarctica into two landmasses separated by a channel exactly how the continent is structured beneath its ice sheet, as revealed by 20th-century seismic surveys. Boich insisted he based the map on ancient maps now lost. These anomalies have fueled speculation for decades. Could there have been a seafaring civilization capable of global exploration during the last ice age? One that created maps so accurate fragments of them survived into the modern era. Mainstream academia generally says no. They point to artistic license, map projection errors, and symbolic representations. And yet each explanation feels a little too neat because the anomalies aren't isolated. In China, the Shanghai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, written over 2,000 years ago, describes distant lands and creatures with uncanny geographic awareness. Scholars argue over its origins, debating whether it's mythology or misremembered exploration. In India, ancient texts speak of island continents and lands beyond the known seas. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs and Maya mapped the stars with such precision that their understanding of time surpasses ours in some ways. Even the portal charts, sailing maps from the 13th and 14th centuries, appear suddenly in Europe with geometric accuracy that defies the rudimentary navigational tools of the time. Their origins are unknown. Some speculate they were copied from earlier, possibly ancient Mediterranean sources. How do these map makers know what they know? Perhaps as with the Antikythera mechanism, we are glimpsing a thread of knowledge that once extended far back in time, passed from hand to hand, culture to culture until only the copies remained. It's worth noting that early medieval Islamic topographers like Al-Idrisi also drew on older Greek and Roman sources. His 12th century Tabella Rogeriana was considered the most accurate world map for centuries. And yet even he spoke of mysterious lands in the West, places unknown to his time but remembered in legend. Now he has an odd fact to ponder as you drift. Ancient navigators understood the concept of longitude, but had no reliable method to calculate it until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. And yet some early maps depict coastlines and distances that would require such knowledge. Did they guess or did they inherit measurements from people who knew more than we assume? The DEP maps created in 16th century France show parts of the southern hemisphere with shocking familiarity, including a massive landmass labeled Havre Grand, which some believe refers to Australia centuries before its official European discovery. Historians still debate whether these features were imaginative projections, misread Asian coastlines, or something more. But again, we find the same pattern. Maps with information that doesn't fit the timeline. Of course, there are natural explanations, oral transmission, copying and copying until the source is lost. A game of topographic telephone played over centuries. But perhaps these maps are echoes, not of fantasy, but of memory. If there was a civilization before the floods, before the ice melted, before the known world, they might not have left great monuments, but they might have left maps. Lightweight, portable, valuable, passed from sailor to scholar, scribbled again and again until no one remembered where they came from, only that they worked. Imagine this. A scroll kept in a monastery for generations, copied by candlelight. Its coastline curves mysterious, its names unreadable, but its geometry precise. It survives a fire, is stitched into another chart, then another, until one day it is called the Piri Reis map. And no one knows where the original came from. So tonight, as you lie in the dark, picture a mariner on a ship made of reeds sailing along a frozen coastline. He watches the stars. He draws what he sees. He doesn't know that one day the sea will rise and the ice will come and the land will vanish. But his map endures. A ghost of a place long drowned, waiting to be believed. In the silence between stones and stars, there is something else humanity leaves behind. Words scratched onto clay, chiseled into walls, inked onto palm leaves and papyrus. But some of those words, entire languages even, have no known origin and no descendants. They appear fully formed, whisper a few sentences into history and vanish. We call them linguistic isolates. Scripts without siblings, tongues without parents. And the deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. Let's begin with the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the great cradles of early urban life, flourishing between 601 900 B.C. across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. The Indies people built cities with advanced drainage systems, grid-planned streets, granaries and water tanks. But their writing system, if it is a writing system, has never been deciphered. The Indie script appears on seals, pottery, tablets, and tools. It's composed of hundreds of distinct signs, some abstract, some resembling animals or people. And yet, it's brief. Most inscriptions are only 5 to 10 symbols long. No long texts. No bilingual Rosetta Stone to compare it with. Despite decades of work, we still don't know if it represents a language, protocrypt, or something else entirely. Was it logographic, syllabic, mnemonic? Historians continue to argue. Some believe the symbols are non-linguistic, a kind of emblem system. Others are convinced they hide a true language we no longer recognize. The people who wrote them gone. Their language, if it was one, has no known descendants. No echo. Just shapes. Then there's Linear A, the mysterious script of the Manawans, who thrived on the island of Cree from around 20 to 450 B.C. They built palaces at Knossos, traded across the Ion, and left behind fresco of dolphins, bulloping athletes, and spiraling labyrinths. They also left behind writing. Linear A appears on tablets, seals, and pottery. It's visually similar to Linear B, which was later used by the Mycenaean Greeks to write an early form of Greek. But when scholars cracked Linear B in the 1950s, hopes of using it to decode Linear A were dashed because Linear A doesn't encode Greek. It encodes something else, a language unrelated to anything we know. Some have proposed that it reflects a pre-Indo-European tongue, a linguistic fossil from before the migrations that shaped most modern European languages. Others suggest connections to ancient Anatolia. But there is no agreement. Like the Indie script, Linear A has no known relatives. It didn't evolve into something else. It didn't branch into dialects. It simply disappears. And then there's Rangirango, on the isolated island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. European explorers in the 18th century found massive stone statues staring out to sea. But they also found wooden tablets covered in mysterious glyphs. Lines of looping abstract figures carved in alternating directions. This was Rangirango, the only known indigenous script of Oceania. The tablets were nearly lost to time. Some were burned by missionaries. Others decayed. Fewer than 30 survive. And no one can read them. What's most perplexing is that writing was not believed to have existed in Polynesia before European contact. Yet, Rangirango appears to be a full writing system, possibly logographic or syllabic. Where did it come from? Was it inspired by outsiders? Or was it a surviving relic of something even older? If the people of Rapa Nui inherited this script, from whom? No one knows. Even Etruscan spoken in ancient Italy before the rise of Rome resists easy classification. Though many Etruscan inscriptions can be phonetically read, because we know the alphabet. The language itself isn't fully understood. It's not Indo-European. It has no close relatives. We can read the words. We just don't always know what they mean. And then there are the truly odd cases. The Fastos disc, discovered in Cree in 1908, is a clay disc covered in spiral sequences of stamped symbols. Over 200 characters, some unique, arranged in a deliberate pattern. It's unlike any other script found in the region. Some think it's a Sayo. If it's real, it could represent a lost writing system from a culture we've never identified. Or consider proto-writing symbols found at Neolithic sites like Tertaria in Romania dating to around 500–300 B.C. These clay tablets bear incised marks that resemble early writing possibly predating Sumerian form. Are they sacred symbols? Tally marks? A forgotten experiment in recording speech? The debate remains. Historians still argue whether writing was invented once in Sumer and spread outward or multiple times independently in different corners of the world. The evidence leans toward multiple origins. If that's true, then it's possible some writing systems existed before the ones we know and were lost entirely. Not buried in stone, but burned, forgotten, swallowed by the tides of conquest, fire, or time. Now, let's zoom out. Language itself, spoken language, is older than writing by tens of thousands of years. Homo sapiens have likely spoken in complex language for at least 100,000 years, possibly longer. Yet, the earliest writing we found dates to only 5,000 years ago. That means 95% of human speech is unrecoverable. Entire cultures, cosmologies, songs, laws, spoken and lost. And even in our own time, languages vanish every year. According to UNESCO, one language disappears approximately every 2 weeks. With each loss, we lose a worldview, a way of describing reality that no other tongue quite matches. Here's something curious to carry into your dreams. Some linguists have found shared mythological motifs. The dragon slayer, the world tree, the twin gods across languages that have no connection. They propose that these ideas may stem from a proto-mythology passed down from a shared deep past long before writing. If that's true, then our ancient ancestors weren't just surviving. They were remembering not with stone, but with syllables. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of those lost languages once told the story of the world before. The world that ended. The world that had to begin again. But with no script. No ruins. Only whispers. How would we ever know? Tonight, as your breath slows and your thoughts begin to melt, imagine sitting at a fire, surrounded by people whose names are no longer spoken. One of them is telling a story in a language no one now understands. A tale of a city made of stone and light, swallowed by the sea, watched by stars that no longer shine. And even though you don't know the words, somehow you understand because memory doesn't always need a dictionary. Sometimes it just needs a voice. And then there it is. Out of the misty haze of prehistory, out of the mudflats between the Tigris and Euphrates, a city rises. Not a village, not a cluster of huts, but a full-fledged structured, breathing city. Sumer. This, we are told, is where it all begins. The first true civilization, the first writing, the first bureaucracy, the first city-states, the first kings. But after everything we've wandered through together, the ruins, the floods, the sunken memories, you might be wondering, did Sumer truly begin anything? Or did it inherit? Let's look at the evidence. The Sumerians arrived on the scene around 4,500 B.C. By 3,000 B.C., they had built cities like Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, and Erplaces with temples, ziggurats, marketplaces, irrigation systems, schools, and courts. They wrote with cuneiform pressed into clay tablets. They recorded laws, hymns, debt receipts, even jokes. Their myths tell of gods descending from the heavens, of kings ruling for tens of thousands of years before the flood, of a golden age that came before. And somehow this all appears suddenly. Uruk, for example, springs from the archaeological record with startling complexity. There's no long build-up, no crude early forms of writing. Ununiform is already developed, used for everything from beer rations to epic poetry. Why? Some scholars believe the answer lies in environmental pressure. As agriculture intensified, the need for record-keeping emerged. Others suggest that urbanism accelerated through trade. Temples evolved into redistributive economies. But the sheer scale of the transformation defies easy explanation. Here's something peculiar. In Eridu, the city the Sumerians claimed as their first, there are 17 layers of temples built one atop the other. The earliest layers predate even Sumer itself, reaching back into the Ubaid period. So who built the first? temple. And why did later people feel the need to preserve its foundation? It suggests memory, continuity, maybe even reverence for something older. And what about their language? Sumerian is a language isolate. It has no known relatives. It's not Semitic like Adian, not Indo-European. It doesn't come from anywhere we can trace. Simply appears. Linguists still debate whether Sumerian was the first written language, or if it evolved from earlier pictographic systems now lost. And it's strange how quickly it becomes sophisticated. Even more curious, the Sumerians had words for metal tools, plows, and sailing vessels before widespread use of such technologies is evident in the archaeological record. And they had beer. Yes. One of the earliest written texts is the Hemi, goddess of beer. It's a recipe, prayer, and a song all in one. They even brewed beer in clay vats, sipping through long straws to avoid sediment, because what's civilization without beer? Off topic maybe, but oddly human. Back to structure. Sumerian society had laws most famously encoded in the Code of Irmu predating Hammurabi's by centuries. It includes penalties for theft, murder, and even false accusation. That means they had not just rulers but legal philosophy. They also had astronomy. The Sumerians divided the sky into constellations, tracked planetary motion, and used a base 60 number system that still lingers in our minutes, seconds, and circles. Historians marvel at how advanced Sumer was. But there's a quiet tension, too. The absence of a slow, clear developmental arc. The sense that everything appeared too quickly. It's as though someone handed them the blueprints. The Sumerians themselves hint at this. In their myths, civilization is not invented but bestowed. According to the myth of Inanna and Enki, the goddess Inanna travels to the watery city of Eridu, where she receives the mi or divine decrees, gifts of civilization, including kingship, wisdom, craftsmanship, music, and even the art of writing. These weren't earned. They were given. Lost in the flood. Recovered. That's the story they told. Now, let's not forget the king list. An ununiform tablet that lists kings from before and after the flood. The pre-flood kings are said to have ruled for tens of thousands of years each. Impossible. Of course. Or is it symbolic? Perhaps it's a distorted memory of long-standing dynasties from before a catastrophe. The flood is described as a dividing line. Civilization reset. And afterward, kingship was lowered from heaven once again. Many scholars read these myths as poetic metaphor, but others quietly admit they may encode deeper truths preserved through exaggeration compressed in symbolism. Consider this. Most cultures require centuries to develop the social cohesion needed to build complex architecture, legal codes, and abstract writing. Yet, the Sumerians do all of it rapidly without precedent. Historians still debate whether this represents independent innovation or the adaptation of older systems passed along from now vanished cultures. We may never know. But the silence beneath Sumer speaks volumes. Even their art shows signs of memory. Some of the earliest Sumerian cylinder seals depict scenes that feel oddly anachronistic. Figures operating complex machinery. Beings with wings. Astronomical diagrams. Are they symbolic? Religious? Or did they remember something deeper? As always, interpretation depends on what you're willing to see. One more detail to consider. Ancient Sumerian clay tablets often show evidence of reuse. Older tablets were scraped clean and repurposed. The past overwritten by the present. Literal palimpsests. How much was lost in those erasers? What might we have learned if just a few more survived? And here's the last whisper. When the Sumerian civilization collapsed around 1900 B.C. due to shifting rivers, invasions or climate, it didn't vanish. Its knowledge passed into Akkad, Babylon, Assyria. The spark endured, but the original voice was silenced. They were the first, perhaps in recorded memory, but maybe not in truth, Tonight, imagine walking through Uruk at twilight. The ziggurat casts a long shadow. Children laugh near canals. Scribes press reeds into wet clay. A priest murmurs to a statue. Above them the stars will silently just as they always have. And in the clay, in the bricks, in the hymns, something older still lingers. Not a beginning, but a recollection. If you climb high enough into the Andes, past the cloud line in the breathless air, you reach a world so old, so weathered, it might as well have stepped out of time. Stone lies scattered across mountain slopes, not just by geology, but by human hands. Vast megaliths arranged with impossible precision. And unlike Egypt or Sumer, the Andes don't begin gently. Their story arrives with a jolt. Already old, already wise, and already strange. We begin at Tiwanaku near the southern shores of Lake Titicaca in modern-day Bolivia. At first glance, the site appears to be a scattering of monoliths, walls, and platforms worn by centuries of sun and wind. But look closer. These stones, some weighing more than 100 tons, are not just large. They are shaped, interlocked, engineered. The Acapana Pyramid, though now partially ruined, once stood as a 7-level stepped structure with complex drainage channels carved into its core. The nearby Pumapunku platform, our real enigma, is scattered with geometrically precise blocks of andesite, a stone so hard it challenges modern tool steel. The most famous of these are the H-blocks, interlocking pieces carved to within millimeters of tolerance. Clean, perfect right angles, deep grooves, channels that suggest a larger machine-like structure now lost. Archaeologists still debate whether Pumapunku was ever completed. Some suggest it was left unfinished, the victims of a sudden cultural decline. Others argue it was destroyed, not by humans, but by a cataclysmic event. And then comes the question, when? Mainstream dating places Tiwanaku's cultural zenith between 500 and 1000 C, long before the Inca. But some evidence hints at much older activity. Radiocarbon tests of organic material from deep beneath the site suggest construction may have begun around 1500 B.C., possibly earlier. A few researchers, including Arthur Poznansky in the early 20th century, controversially claimed Tiwanaku's astronomical alignments dated it to 15000 B.C., based on the positions of the solstices. His theories were largely dismissed, but the idea never truly died. If true, that would place Tiwanaku not in the early Bronze Age, but deep within the last Ice Age. A radical claim, but one that continues to attract new eyes. Why? Because Tiwanaku isn't alone. Scattered across the Andes are hundreds of megalithic structures, many exhibiting similar architectural patterns. Polygonal masonry, stones fitted so tightly that even earthquakes leave them standing. Sacsayhuaman, above modern Cusco, we've already met. Its massive serpentine walls are so perfectly joined that no mortar was ever needed. But who built the foundations? The Inca claimed descent from Varasca, a bearded god who came from the sea and taught the arts of civilization. They said Viracha built the great structures. Not them. Further north at Ollantaytambo, massive granite stones were transported across a valley up steep inclines and fitted into a temple complex that seems beyond the logistical capabilities of its time. The quarry lies 6 kilometers away across the Urubamba River. And at Machu Picchu, the lost city in the clouds, every terrace, every water channel, every stair is part of a greater design, resilient to erosion, landslides, and centuries of abandonment. The craftsmanship echoes an older hand. So, how did they do it? Some suggest brute force, labor, rope, rolling logs. But these explanations falter when faced with tight interior joints, stones with multiple complex faces, walls built without standardized blocks where every stone is unique. Some even appear to lock into each other like jigsaw pieces, and scholars still debate whether the Insur inherited their architectural knowledge from earlier cultures, or whether they rediscovered it through trial and error. But what cannot be denied is this. The techniques are remarkably uniform across vast distances and centuries, which begs the question. Was there once a master culture? A shared template passed down? A whisper from something older? In Highland mythology, that idea survives, and peoples tell of a time before the sun when a race of giants lived in the land. They built great cities of stone but were destroyed by a flood. Then came Viracha, who reshaped the world. In the Ketwa language, this primordial age is called the Naya Pacha, the time of the ancestors, the age before memory. It is never depicted as primitive. Quite the opposite. It is remembered as a time of great builders, of knowledge, of gods who walked the earth. And there is one more site that deepens the mystery. On the island of the Sun in Lake Titicaca lies a temple complex with terrace agriculture and an ancient solar observatory. The Inca claimed it was the birthplace of the first humans sent by the gods. Ritual offerings have been found at depths suggesting continuous worship for over 2,000 years. Astonishingly, some underwater structures have also been discovered in Lake Titicaca. Stone platforms, walls, and roads submerged below modern lake levels. These suggest the water level was once lower, and that people built along its ancient shore. When possibly during the late glacial period when melting glaciers caused rapid lake expansion. If true, these structures may predate non-Andean civilization by millennia, and again they are built with stone intention memory. Odd fact: llamas native to this region were once used in complex ceremonial astronomy. Animal bones aligned with solstices have been found at ancient observatories. Their migration and mating cycles matched lunar calendars, integrating biology with celestial timekeeping. This suggests a worldview where time was embodied, not just counted. Historians are still debating whether these early Andean cultures developed independently, or if they inherited lost knowledge from an older source. The Andes were isolated, but isolation can preserve as well as erase. And then there's the quipu. The Inca's writing system, if we can call it that, consisted of knotted chords arranged in clusters, each knot type and placement holding meaning. For years, quippers were dismissed as merely accounting tools. But recent studies suggest they may have encoded narrative information as well. Stories, lineages, even cosmologies. Imagine that. A civilization whose history was woven, not written. Could this system have been inherited from earlier people? Could we be looking at a memory technology from before the flood? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But it's worth noting that when the Spanish arrived, they destroyed most of the queers. What little we know comes from the few survivors hidden away. So tonight, breathe in that thin Andean air. Feel the stone beneath your feet. Let your fingers trace the curves of a block cut by someone who has no name in any history book. Maybe he was a master. Maybe he was remembering. In the silence of the mountains, there are no voices, but the stones are still aligned. Deserts are good at hiding things. They whisper rather than shout. Sand drifts over cities, seals away rivers, buries time itself beneath endless dunes. And there is one desert so vast, so ancient that it has swallowed an entire continent's memory. The Sahara. Today it stretches over 9 million square km across North Africa. Hostile, dry, and nearly lifeless. But once it was green from about 10,000 to 5,000 BC, during what scientists call the African humid period. The Sahara was a savanna, a lush, rolling sea of grass and lakes, forests, and wildlife. It supported elephants, giraffes, crocodiles, and most importantly, humans. People fished, hunted, herded cattle, and perhaps built something more. We begin in the Tassili Naja, a rocky plateau in southeastern Algeria. Hidden among its canyons and stone outcrops is a treasure trove of prehistoric rock art. Over 15,000 000 images spanning thousands of years. These aren't simple stick figures. They show people swimming in rivers, riding horses, hunting, dancing. Some wear elaborate headdresses or robes. Some hold what appear to be tools or instruments or something we no longer understand. And then there are the figures that don't look entirely human. The so-called round head figures are some of the oldest, dating to 8,000 B.C. They have large bulbous heads, no visible mouths, and elongated limbs. Some float, some reach upward, some are surrounded by halos or strange patterns. They're stylized, yes, but they feel different. Anthropologists debate their meaning. Are they shamans? Spirits? Aliens? Few believe certain television shows. Most academics say they represent a spiritual worldview, possibly linked to trance states or early religious rites. But even the cautious agree the art reflects complexity, not just in style, but in society. This was not survival art. It was symbolic, ceremonial, sophisticated, which leads to an uncomfortable thought. What else did these people create besides art? Satellite imagery has revealed the ghost lines of ancient river systems, including the massive Tamarset River, which once ran through the heart of the Sahara, fed by rainfall and glacial melt. Along these dried rivers, archaeologists have found burial mounds, megalithic circles, and even grids, possible foundations of ancient dwellings now eroded to their shadows. One such site is Naphtaliar, which we visited before. Circle of standing stones dating to 6,000 B.C. predating Stonehenge by more than 1,000 years. Its alignment to the summer solstice and certain star patterns suggests astronomical knowledge, careful, measured, and deliberate. So who are the people of the Green Sahara? We don't know. No name. No text. No known descendants. They lived for millennia, then vanished. Or perhaps migrated as the rain stopped and the desert returned. Some may have moved north, becoming the Berbers. Others may have joined Nile Valley cultures like pre-dynastic Egypt. And here lies another mystery. Egypt doesn't just appear. It erupts into history. The first dynasties already had writing, monumental architecture, cosmology, and kingship. Where did this complexity come from? Some Egyptologists suggest that the roots of Egyptian civilization lie not along the Nile, but in the Sahara, in those vanished cultures who fled as their world dried up. Supporting this theory are artifacts and iconography. For example, some early Egyptian deities share motifs with Saharan rock art. The figure of Set, the desert god, bears features similar to some roundhead figures. The Syriac, an early royal crest, resembles cattle enclosures used by Saharan herders. And then there's the ancient Egyptian obsession with the West, the land of the dead, where the sun goes to die. The desert. Is it possible they were not just turning toward death, but toward a lost homeland? Historians continue to debate the origins of Egyptian civilization, but many now believe that migratory pulses from the Sahara contributed significantly to its formation. Climate change was not just an ecological shift. It was a civilizational filter reshaping the flow of humanity. Odd fact. In 2020, researchers using ground-penetrating radar in southern Egypt discovered a network of prehistoric structures buried beneath the desert. Walls, mounds, possible roads. They're still being studied. But again, they suggest organized, purposeful building in a place we assumed was empty, which leads to an unsettling realization. What if much of the evidence for early civilization is not buried beneath forests or oceans, but beneath sand? Sand is deceptive. It preserves and erases. It hides the ruins, but also protects them from weather, plants, and overbuilding. The Sahara may be one of the largest archaeological vaults on the planet, but it is barely explored. Harsh conditions, political instability, lack of funding. These have all made systematic excavation nearly impossible. We've sent more missions to Mars than to the inner Sahara. And so the silence remains. Every now and then, a breeze shifts a dune, and a stone circle is revealed. A piece of pottery, a bone, a hint, but no names, no stories, unless we listen to the myths. The Berbers speak of a time when the desert was a sea, when their ancestors crossed fertile plains. The dune of Marley remembers sky gods and sunken lands. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of a mysterious western land called Amenti, a place of origin and of endings. Perhaps these are echoes of the Green Sahara. Perhaps they are fiction. But perhaps they are the last surviving voices of a civilization swallowed not by water, but by sand. As you rest tonight, imagine standing atop a dune at twilight. The wind is still. The horizon stretches in all directions. Beneath your feet, perhaps just meters below, lies a stone wall, a hearth, temple, a city no one has seen in 10,000 years. The sand breathes softly and waits. There is something particularly haunting about ruins beneath the ocean. They lie silent, invisible from above, shrouded in currents and kelp, visited only by fish and divers brave enough to descend. Unlike deserts or jungles which erode and reclaim slowly, the sea swallows completely. A wave rises and a city vanishes. And yet the ocean forgets nothing. Across the world, from the coasts of India to the Isles of Japan, there are submerged structures that hint ever so faintly at civilizations lost not to time but to rising tides. Let's begin with Dwarka off the coast of Gujarat, India. According to Indian mythology, Dwarka was the golden city of Lord Krishna submerged beneath the sea after his death. For centuries, it was assumed to be purely legend. But in the early 2000s, marine archaeologists discovered geometric stone formations, walls, and rectangular blocks beneath the Gulf of Cat in water depths of up to 40 m. Sonar scans revealed patterns that didn't seem natural. Diverse retrieved tools, pottery fragments, and even human teeth. Carbon dated to around 7,500 B.C. If these dates are accurate, it places the underwater ruins 2 millennia before Sumer. Some researchers remain cautious. They argue that the formations might be natural, or that the artifacts drifted in from land. Others point out that the Nameda River, which flows nearby, could have washed older materials into the area. But still, the possibility lingers. A city beneath the sea, matching an ancient story, dated to a time when the Holene warming period was still young. Historians still debate whether the site is truly artificial. But even if it's not Dwarka, it suggests settlement along coasts now drowned by rising seas. And Dwarka is not alone. Let's move east to Japan to the island of Yonaguni. In 1986, a diver named Kihatiro Aritake stumbled upon a massive underwater formation. Terraces, platforms, steps, and what appear to be ramps and roads lying about 25 m beneath the surface. The so-called Yonani Monument has since become one of the most hotly contested archaeological sites in the world. Mainstream geologists claim it's a natural formation, a series of sandstone layers shaped by tectonic movement and erosion. But others argue the lines are too straight, the angles too perfect. Some even point to what looks like stairways, columns, and carvings. If Yonaguni is artificial, it would have to date back at least 10,000 years to when sea levels were significantly lower. That would place it in the same category as Göbekli, far older than any known stone architecture. Is it possible? Well, here's something curious. Japan's German culture, dating back to around 14,000 B.C., is one of the oldest pottery-making societies in the world. They were not simple hunter-gatherers. They created art, rituals, and lived in semi-permanent settlements. If any society in that region could have built something before the floodwaters rose, it was them. We continue west to Dogland, the sunken landmass that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. During the last ice age, the North Sea was dry land, a vast plain rich in wildlife, rivers, and human habitation. As the glaciers melted, sea levels rose, and Doggeran disappeared beneath the waves between 500 and 6,000 B.C. Today, sonar and drilling operations have recovered stone tools, bone harpoons, and peat layers containing pollen and DNA from ancient forests. Some of the best evidence comes not from excavation, but from fishermen who haul up mammoth bones and flint axes in their nets. We know Dogland existed. We know people lived there. But we don't know how far they advanced. No stone buildings have yet been found. But the seabed is difficult to access. Still, there could be villages, temples, even burial grounds preserved under the mud. And here's the real twist. Many of Earth's earlier settlements were likely coastal. Water provides food, transport, trade. But after the Ice Age ended, the seas rose over 400 feet. That's a lot of coast to lose. Today, 20% of the land humans occupied 12,000 years ago is now underwater. The implication: we might have lost entire chapters of human civilization beneath the sea. Odd fact: the oldest known submerged site is Pavla Petri off the coast of Greece. Dated to 2800 B.C. It features streets, courtyards, rooms, and even plumbing, all preserved under shallow waters. Proves that urban planning existed before the Menians. But again, it's just the part we found. And there's more. In the Bahamas, divers have long debated the nature of the Bimini Road, a submerged structure of massive rectangular stones that seem to form a path. Is it natural limestone fracturing or the remnant of a harbor or seawall? No one knows. But it's enough to make you wonder. Historians are still debating how much history we've lost to sea level rise. Some call for more funding for submerged archaeology, especially along continental shelves. Others remain skeptical, pointing to the rarity of preserved structures. But the tide is changing. Advanced sonar, LiDAR, and underwater drones have begun to reveal submerged coastlines in India, Italy, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and Thailand. Every year, a few more pieces emerge. Yet, the ocean remains stubborn, and its silence is heavy. So tonight, imagine drifting down through clear blue water. Fish scatter. Sunlight filters through. Below you lies a stone wall, a flight of stairs, the threshold of a door no one has passed through in 10,000 years. A city drowned not by punishment or wrath, but by time itself. Doesn't cry out. It doesn't warn. It waits. And maybe, just maybe, in some deep, salty corridor, a story is still being told in bubbles, in currents, in coral. A city dreaming beneath the sea. So much of this story is about what's been lost. But here, in the hush between ancient echoes and modern noise, we turn to what might have survived. Not the cities, not the temples, not even the scripts, but the ideas transmitted not through architecture, but through myth, through bloodlines, through memory wrapped in metaphor. Let's return for a moment to the flood. This motif of water rising, of civilization drowning, of knowledge being swept away is not confined to the Epic of Gilgamesh or to Noah or to Atlantis. It shows up everywhere in the legends of the Maya, the Hopi, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Nordic sagas, and even the Aboriginal Australians. The names and shapes change, but the rhythm is the same. A great age ends. Few survive. And from those survivors, the world begins again. Could there have been an actual group? Perhaps a priesthood or a scattered remnant of a pre-sea cataclysmic civilization that carried pieces of knowledge forward into the Neolithic world. Historians are still debating this. The mainstream view holds that while myths may contain grains of truth, they are not historical records. But alternative scholars point to the astonishing similarities in flood narratives separated by oceans. Some suggest that migratory groups displaced by rising seas or sudden environmental change brought seeds of civilization with them. Astronomy, calendar systems, agriculture, and oral history. Let's look at one such group. The Tuatha De Danann of Irish mythology. They are described as gods or demigods arriving in Ireland from the sky or from mysterious western lands. They bring with them 4 magical treasures: a sword, a stone, a spear, and a cauldron. But more than that, they bring wisdom, law, music, and craftsmanship. They teach the humans. They build mounds and fortresses. Eventually, they retreat underground, becoming the Housie, the fairy folk. Not dead, just hidden. Are they merely folklore or a memory of an older culture arriving from the Atlantic? Oddly, the megalithic tombs of Ireland, such as New Grange, align precisely with the winter solstice. The engineering required is non-trivial, especially for a society supposedly on the cusp of the Stone Age. And New Grange is older than the pyramids. It is not just a tomb. It is a calendar, a resonator, a memory capsule. Then there are the Dune of Marley. This West African people possess oral traditions that include remarkably detailed knowledge of astronomy, specifically the binary star system of Sirius. They describe Sirius B, a companion star invisible to the naked eye, and even claim it has a 50-year orbit, something only confirmed by telescopes in the 20th century. Where did they learn this? Skeptics argue the information could have been contaminated by European contact, or that the stories were retrofitted. Others insist the dune preserve fragments of ancient sky law passed down from a much earlier culture. And then there's the Nag Hammadi texts unearthed in Egypt in 1945. Among these is the Apocryphon of John, which tells of a forgotten race, the Archons, and a world before memory. It speaks of layers of reality, of cosmic deception, and a cycle of forgetting and remembering. Not exactly historical evidence, but you begin to notice a pattern. The knowledge bearers are often described as outsiders, pale-skinned or bearded, shining or feathered, arriving from over the sea or from the stars. They appear across Central America as Quetzalcoatl, in Mesopotamia as Owens, in Polynesia as Tiki, and in Egypt as Tu. They teach then vanish. Are these just symbols of consciousness or dimly remembered figures who sparked the rebirth of civilization after a collapse? Hard to say. But these myths emerge most vividly in places where megalithic ruins exist. Those same temples, tombs, and cities we've been walking through. And sometimes survivors leave more than stories. In Peru, along the coastal plain, lies a vast mysterious geoglyph known as the Praz Candelabra, a trident-like symbol carved into the hillside visible from the sea. It may be 2,000 years old or 10. No one knows for sure. But whoever etched it intended it to be seen from above. Across the Nazca Desert, 100 miles inland, more lines stretch across the land. Animals, spirals, grids, best visible only from the air. Why could they have been signals? Calendars, maps. Historians still argue. The lines are typically dated between 500 BC and 500 CE, but no definitive explanation has settled the debate. There's another kind of survivor to consider. Knowledge not in myth or monument but in the body. Genetic studies have revealed traces of unknown hominins in human DNA. Ancient humans interbred not just with Neanderthals and denizens but possibly with other unidentified populations. The so-called ghost lineages. If humans can carry the memory of species, could we carry the memory of civilizations? Unlikely perhaps, but tantalizing to imagine. Even in more grounded terms, linguistic relics remain. Some words in Basque, Sumerian, and Dravidian languages defy classification. They are linguistic orphans untethered to any known tree. And still the myths whisper. The Popol Vuh, sacred text of the Ma, speaks of multiple creations and destructions. The Rig Veda recalls ages before fire and time. The Zohar in Jewish mysticism tells of worlds that were made and shattered. So, what do we make of this? Were there survivors of a forgotten age carrying stonework, calendar systems, and flood myths into the next chapter of humanity? Or are we simply watching the mind project order onto chaos, connecting dots that never belonged together? Either way, the result is the same. A story retold, reshaped, repeated, and you now are part of it. As your eyes grow heavy, picture a traveler wrapped in furs crossing a broken landscape. On his back he carries a bundle inside seeds, a carved stone, a star map. He doesn't know why they matter, only that they must be remembered. And one day, perhaps in a new land, he will find others. He will teach, and they will begin again. And now we arrive at the edge. Not the end of civilization, but the end of the trail. The final footprints before the wind takes them. The quiet moment when you still and listening must ask, what have we actually found? We've followed the ghosts. We've walked through deserts, waded through jungles, and descended into the depths of the sea. We've knelt beside shattered ziggurats in sunken cities, pressed our palms to the seams of stone blocks that shouldn't fit so well, and stared at the stars with the same confused wonder as the people who came before us. But still, the memory remains fragmented. Perhaps that's the point. You see, history, the real kind, is not a continuous scroll. It's a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. Some were never written down. Some were erased. Some were drowned. Some perhaps were never meant to survive. But memory behaves differently. It hides in unexpected places. In the orientation of a temple. In a children's song. In the myth of a flood. In a forgotten dialect. In a stone tool buried beneath volcanic ash. In your DNA. And through it all, one strange truth whispers. Civilization may not be a line. It may be a loop. What if humanity has risen and fallen multiple times? What if thousands of years before Sa or Egypt, there was another great awakening, one not recorded in books, but in the bones of our world? This is the core of the idea we've been circling gently all along. Not conspiracy, not a grand secret, but a quiet possibility that human beings have walked this earth, loved, built, watched the stars, and perished more than once. And maybe each time something was passed down. A method of counting the days. A story of how the world ends. A pattern for stacking stones. And a promise to try again. Odd fact. The earliest known calendar may be a set of notches on a bone found in the Congo dating to 20,000 BC. The Ashango bone. Not grand. Not glorious. Just scratches. Tally marks. But they map the phases of the moon with startling accuracy. Think about that. At the very edge of what we call prehistory, someone looked up at the sky and said, I will count this. I will remember this. Why? Because even in the darkness, even when everything else is lost, there is a part of us that refuses to forget. And yet, historians are still debating how deep the roots of human civilization truly go. Some cling to the notion of a linear march from cave to hut to village to city. Others more cautiously propose a more interrupted history. Cycles of emergence, collapse, silence, and rediscovery. We don't know. But maybe we don't need to know. Maybe the story is already written. Not in books, but in patterns. The repeated alignment of sacred sites with solstices. The obsession with certain symbols. Spirals, stars, serpents. The way cultures separated by oceans speak of a flood, of beings from the sky, of golden ages lost. It's not proof, but it is poetry. And poetry is how memory survives when all else fails. So now let your eyes grow heavy. Imagine the earth not as a timeline, but as a pimpist. A manuscript written and rewritten across the ages. Scratched away. Inked again. Smudged. Rewritten. Beneath every new word is an older one. And beneath that, another. And at the very bottom, a name you've never heard. A place that no longer exists. A people who dreamed under different stars. They are gone now. But you have found their story. Or perhaps their echo. You've walked the long arc of forgetting and rediscovery. You've questioned what you were told. You've wondered how the past can be so loud and so quiet at the same time. And now with the lights dimming, the questions fade. Too. Not because they're answered, but because they've done their work. And all that's left now is the silence of the world remembering itself. You've come a long way tonight. Through the soft dust of the ziggurat. Through the chilled fog of submerged streets. Through the prickling desert winds and the scent of wet stone. You've wandered across 30,000 years. Not on a quest for answers, but for something gentler. Pattern. Possibility. And now, as the story exhales its last, you're not expected to solve anything. That's not why you came. You came to drift. To wonder. To feel the soft gravity of what might have been. Close your eyes now. Picture the earth in twilight. The continents dim. The sea. Somewhere beneath jungle or ocean. A temple still stands. A circle of stone still marks the stars. Someone once walked there thinking thoughts will never translate. Someone once whispered stories that will never be told again. But you heard the echo. And that's enough. Let your thoughts soften like the edge of a dream. Let go of timelines. Of maps. Of categories. History isn't linear. It isn't even circular. It's tidal. It comes in waves. Some recede. Some return. So sleep now. Not as one who ends a journey, but as one who remembers. Let the world rebuild itself behind your eyes. Let the forgotten rise just for a while. You're not alone. You never were. We've all been here before. And when the morning comes and you wake, the world will still be here. Strange. Unfinished. Beautiful. Waiting for someone. Maybe you. To pick up the thread again. To trace the lines. To remember the name beneath the dust. And until then, good night.